Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Benjamin Hartwell, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 17 years. People call me Ben, and I've walked every trail, mapped every cave, and pulled 23 people alive from these mountains when search helicopters gave up looking. My grandmother used to tell me stories about things that lived under the mountains. Cherokee stories passed down through generations. I never believed them. I had a college degree in archaeology and a scientific mind. Old mountain folklore was just that, folklore. I should have listened to her. It was late October 1977 when everything changed. The leaves had turned blood red, and thick fog rolled through the valleys every evening. Temperature dropped 30 degrees after sunset, and the mountains felt different somehow. Restless. I was working the Cataloochee Valley backcountry that week. It's one of the most remote areas in the park, where Cherokee villages once stood before the government moved everyone west. Now it's just abandoned settler cabins from the 1,930 seconds and miles of virgin forest. The kind of place where your radio goes dead and the nearest road is 15 miles through rough terrain. That Tuesday morning, I got a call about 3 missing spelunkers, cave explorers. Their names were Mike, Sarah, and Tom, all experienced, all with proper permits for the limestone cave system near the old Cherokee burial grounds. They'd been due back Monday evening. Their families were worried. I knew those caves better than anyone. I'd mapped most of them myself over the years. The main system was stable, well documented, nothing dangerous if you followed basic safety rules. These weren't weekend amateurs either. Mike had been caving for 15 years, but something about this felt wrong from the start. I drove my truck as far as the old logging road would take me, then hiked 2 miles through thick forest to their last known campsite. The morning was too quiet. No bird calls. No insects. Even the wind had stopped, which never happens in these mountains. When I found their camp, my skin crawled. Everything was there: tents, sleeping bags, cooking gear, but it was all arranged in perfect circles around the cold fire pit, like someone had carefully placed each item exactly 2 feet from the next. The spelunkers were neat, sure, but this was different. This was deliberate. I radioed dispatch. Base, this is Ranger Hartwell. Found the missing party's campsite. Something's not right here. Static. Then, copy Ben. What's your status? Gear's here, but arranged strangely. No signs of struggle. I'm checking the cave entrance. The cave mouth was 100 yards from camp, hidden behind a wall of rhododendron bushes. I'd been inside dozens of times. It was a simple system main chamber, 2 side passages, nothing complicated. The kind of cave you could explore in a few hours. But when I pushed through the bushes, I stopped cold. Fresh claw marks scored the limestone around the entrance. Deep gouges in solid rock, like something with claws the size of railroad spikes had been scratching to get out, or get in. The marks were new. I'd checked this cave 2 weeks ago, and they hadn't been there. I pulled out my thermometer. The air temperature was 45 degrees outside the cave. At the entrance, it dropped to 25. That didn't make sense. Cave temperatures stay constant year-round, usually matching the area's average annual temperature. My radio crackled. Cherokee words came through the static. I recognized some of them from my grandmother's stories. Words about stone giants sleeping under the earth. I shook my head. Equipment malfunction. These old radios picked up all kinds of interference in the mountains. I strapped on my headlamp and checked my gear. Rope, first aid kit, emergency beacon. Standard cave rescue protocol. I'd done this hundreds of times. But as I stepped into that cave entrance, every instinct I'd developed in 17 years of mountain work screamed at me to turn around. The limestone walls felt warm to the touch despite the cold air. My compass needle spun wildly before pointing directly into the cave instead of magnetic north. And somewhere deep in the darkness ahead, I could swear I heard breathing. Not human breathing, something much larger. I should have left then, should have called for backup and waited. But 3 people were missing, possibly hurt, and I was the only ranger who knew these caves well enough to find them quickly. I walked into the darkness, my headlamp beam cutting through air that seemed too thick, too heavy. Behind me, I heard the sound of stone grinding against stone. The main chamber looked wrong. I'd been in this cave 50 times, knew every formation, every passage. But the limestone formations seemed taller somehow, closer together. Stalactites hung lower than I remembered, forcing me to duck, in places where I'd always walked upright. My headlamp beam bent strangely in the chamber, curving left when I aimed it straight ahead. The sound of my footsteps echoed wrong too. Instead of the sharp crack of boots on stone, it sounded muffled, like walking through deep mud. "Hello," I called out. "Mike, Sarah, Tom, Park Service." My voice echoed back, but it wasn't my voice anymore. The echo spoke Cherokee words I didn't recognize. I found their equipment 30 feet into the main passage. Headlamps, rope, mapping gear, all neatly arranged in another perfect circle. But according to my map, they should have been much deeper in the cave system by now. This was still the entrance area. The beam of my light caught something carved into the wall. Fresh scratches in the limestone, still showing white stone underneath. Cherokee symbols. My grandmother had taught me a few, but these were older, more complex. They seemed to move in my peripheral vision. I took photos with my backup camera, though the flash seemed dimmer than usual, swallowed up by the cave's darkness. That's when I heard the breathing again. Deep, slow, rhythmic, coming from the passage that led deeper into the mountain. "Is someone there?" I called. "This is Park Service. If you're injured, I'm here to help." The breathing stopped. Then, from somewhere impossibly deep in the cave system, came a sound I'd never heard before. Like stone grinding against stone, but rhythmic, musical almost. It reminded me of my grandmother's lullabies, but played by something vast and ancient. I followed the sound deeper into the cave. The passage should have ended after 50 yards in a small chamber I'd mapped years ago. Instead, it kept going. Down, always down, into sections that weren't on any survey. The walls grew warmer as I descended, and my equipment started acting stranger. My radio picked up more Cherokee voices. Not static or interference, actual conversations in a language I barely understood. They sounded like they were coming from the stone itself. My thermometer read 60 degrees, then 70. In a cave that should have been 45 degrees throughout, the passage opened into a chamber that couldn't exist. According to my maps, I should have been outside the mountain by now, but this chamber was enormous, cathedral-sized. My headlamp beam couldn't find the ceiling or far walls, and the chamber was occupied. Stone formations filled the space, but they weren't natural stalactites and stalagmites. They were shaped like sleeping people. Giant people, 15 to 20 feet tall, carved from limestone with incredible detail. I could see faces, hands, the folds of stone clothing. They looked like they were dreaming. My grandmother's words came back to me. "The none you knew we sleep under the mountains, Benjamin. Stone giants who guard the sacred places. Don't wake them," I laughed. Stress reaction. These were just unusual rock formations. Cave geology could create amazing shapes. I was letting childhood stories affect my judgment. Then one of the stone giant's eyes opened. Not carved eyes, real eyes, deep and dark as cave pools, looking directly at me. I stumbled backward, my light wavering. When the beam steadied, the eyes were closed again, just stone. But the breathing had returned, louder now. Coming from all around me, I needed to find the missing spelunkers and get out. Fast. Deeper in the chamber, I found Tom's helmet. Then Sarah's backpack. Then Mike's rope, cut clean through with something sharp enough to slice climbing rope like thread. No bodies, no blood, just equipment scattered around the base of the stone giants like offerings. My radio crackled with Cherokee voices again, clearer now. I caught words I recognized: awake, hungry, coming up. The stone grinding sound started again, but now I could tell what it was. The giants were moving, slowly, almost imperceptibly, like mountains shifting over geological time, but moving. Stone hands flexed, massive heads turned slightly on stone necks. 20-foot-tall guardians stirring from sleep that had lasted centuries. I ran. The passage back to the entrance seemed different now. Longer, narrower, passages branched off that hadn't existed before, leading deeper into darkness. My compass spun uselessly. My map was worthless. Behind me, the grinding grew louder. Stone feet scraping against stone floors. Something enormous trying to stand up in a space that had contained it for hundreds of years. I reached what should have been the main chamber, but found myself in a different cave entirely. This one had fresh scratch marks covering every wall. Cherokee symbols carved deep into stone. Still bleeding limestone dust. My headlamp flickered and died. In the darkness, I heard my grandmother's voice singing. The same lullabies she'd sung to me as a child. The Cherokee songs that kept bad things away. But her voice was coming from the stone walls themselves. I fumbled for my backup light, hands shaking. When the beam came on, I was face to face with Sarah. She was standing 20 feet away, perfectly still, perfectly silent. Her eyes reflected my light like an animal's. She didn't blink. "Sarah," I called. "Are you hurt? Where are Mike and Tom?" She smiled. Her mouth opened too wide, showing teeth that weren't quite right, and when she spoke, it was in Cherokee. Words I understood. "They're sleeping now. Deep sleeping. Stone sleeping." Then she was gone. Not moved gone, like she'd never been there, but her footprints remained in the cave floor. Footprints pressed into solid stone, as if it had been soft mud. The cave system was alive. As I stumbled through passages that rearranged themselves when I wasn't looking, I could feel the mountain breathing around me. The walls expanded and contracted slightly, like being inside something's lungs. The warm limestone pulsed under my palms like a massive heartbeat. My backup radio worked sporadically, picking up transmissions from the surface. Jake Whitehorse, the Cherokee Nation liaison, was coordinating with my partner Susan Crawford. They knew I was overdue, but radio contact was too broken to call for immediate help. "Ben, hear me?" Jake's voice crackled through static. "Something's wrong. The elders are." "Ceremony." The transmission cut to Cherokee chanting. Low voices singing in harmony, words that made the cave walls vibrate in response. I found Mike an hour later. He was sitting against a limestone wall in a chamber I'd never seen before. Legs crossed, eyes closed, breathing so slowly I thought he was dead at first. When I touched his shoulder, his skin was cold as stone. "Mike, Mike, wake up!" His eyes opened slowly, but they were solid white now. No pupils, no iris, just white stone where his eyes should be. "The giants are hungry," he said in a voice like grinding rock. "They need to feed before they can sleep again." We volunteered. "You're hypothermic," I said, trying to stay rational. "We need to get you warmed up and out of here." I tried to lift him, but he was impossibly heavy. Like he was turning to stone himself. "Tom and Sarah are already sleeping the stone sleep," Mike continued. "It doesn't hurt, it's peaceful, the giants are kind. They just need us to help them rest." His skin was turning gray, hardening. I could see limestone veins spreading through his arms like infection. "Fight it," I said. "Whatever's happening, you can fight it." But Mike was already becoming part of the cave wall. His body merged with the limestone, becoming another formation, another sleeping figure for future cavers to puzzle over. As the stone closed over his face, he whispered, "Don't fight them, Ben. Your grandmother knew. Respect the agreement." I was alone in a cave system that defied physics, running out of light, with 3 people either dead or transformed into stone. That's when I heard Jake calling my name. His voice echoed from somewhere ahead, real and human and alive. I followed it through passage after passage, each one different from my maps, each one leading deeper into the mountain's heart. I found Jake in a massive chamber filled with sleeping stone giants. Dozens of them, arranged in concentric circles around a central formation that looked like an altar. Jake was kneeling beside it, his hands pressed to the stone, his eyes closed in concentration. "Jake, thank God, we need to get out of here right now." He opened his eyes. They were still his own, still human, but filled with ancient knowledge that hadn't been there this morning. "I've been talking to them," he said quietly. "The Nununui, the stone giants. They're not evil, Ben, they're guardians. They've been protecting these mountains for thousands of years. They killed Mike. They killed all 3 of them." "No," Jake said. "They preserved them. The spelunkers were disturbing sacred sites, breaking ancient agreements. The giants absorbed them to prevent greater destruction." The chamber grew warmer. Around us, The stone giants were definitely moving now. Hands flexed, massive heads turned slightly in our direction. They were waking up, and we were in their sacred space. "Jake, we have to run, now." "There's nowhere to run," he said. "The mountain won't let us leave until this is resolved. The giants need to feed, to return to their deep sleep. More cave explorers come every season, Ben. More sacred sites get violated. The giants' sleep grows lighter each year." One of the stone guardians near the altar was sitting up now, 15 feet of living limestone moving with impossible grace. Its eyes opened deep, ancient, patient eyes that had watched these mountains since before the Cherokee came. It looked at me with recognition. "Your blood remembers," Jake said. "Your grandmother taught you the old songs. The giants know your family line." The stone giant reached out one massive hand toward me, not threatening, inviting. Its fingers were the size of tree branches, worn smooth by centuries. "They want to make a new agreement," Jake continued. "The old protections are weakening. They need a guardian who understands both worlds, traditional knowledge and modern authority." Other giants were waking up around the chamber. 20 or more, their stone bodies creaking as they moved for the first time in generations. The sound filled the space like a mountain avalanche played in slow motion. I backed away, but the passage behind me had sealed itself. Solid stone where the entrance had been moments ago. "Ben," Jake said gently, "your grandmother prepared you for this your entire life. The lullabies she taught you, they're not just songs. They're the old agreements, the old protections. The giants recognize them." The largest guardian, sitting directly in front of the altar, spoke in a voice like distant thunder. "Choose, grandson of the singer. Join us in stone sleep and protect the sacred places forever, or sing the old songs and help us return to deep dreaming." Its words were Cherokee, but somehow I understood every syllable. The choice was simple and terrible: become a stone guardian myself, or find a way to put the giants back to sleep before they decided modern humanity was too dangerous to tolerate. Either way, 3 people were dead, and I was responsible for whatever happened next. The chamber filled with the sound of stone giants rising from centuries of sleep. 20 massive guardians, each one 15 to 20 feet tall, their limestone bodies creaking and grinding as they stood for the first time since Cherokee shamans had sung them to rest. The largest giant, clearly their leader, stepped forward. Each footfall made the entire mountain tremble. When it spoke, its voice resonated through my bones. "The agreements are broken, grandson of the singer," it said in Cherokee. "Your people have forgotten the old ways. They violate sacred places with metal tools and bright lights. They map the secret chambers where we keep the mountain's heart." I understood every word, though I'd never been fluent. The giant's speech bypassed my ears, speaking directly to something deeper. "The 3 who sleep in our embrace," the giant continued. "They were warned. The Cherokee elder spoke to them yesterday, told them these caves were sacred, forbidden. They laughed and continued their exploration." Jake stood up from beside the altar, his face grim. "The giants have been patient, Ben. For decades, they've absorbed individual cave explorers, hoping modern people would learn to stay away. But more come every year. They're tired of gentle warnings." Around the chamber, stone guardians moved with surprising grace, their ancient eyes fixed on me, waiting for my response to their leader's words. "What do you want?" I asked. "The old agreement," the giant said. "Your grandmother's grandmother helped make it. Cherokee shamans would sing us to deep sleep in exchange for our protection of the sacred places. We would dream of guarding these mountains, and the Cherokee would keep explorers away from our chambers. But the Cherokee were forced to leave." I said. "The government moved them west." "Yes," the giant said, sadness like landslides in its voice. And the songs stopped. "For nearly 200 years, we have slept lightly, disturbed by every footfall in our chambers. We grow restless, hungry. Soon we will wake fully and reclaim all the sacred spaces." Jake stepped closer to me. "Ben, if they wake completely, they won't just protect caves. They'll protect the entire Cherokee homeland. Every mountain, every valley where sacred sites once stood. They'll push out every modern settlement, every road, every building." The implications hit me like ice water. Millions of people lived in the ancient Cherokee territory. Cities, towns, farms, All of it would be reclaimed by beings with the power to reshape landscapes. But the songs, I said desperately. My grandmother taught me some of them. Yes, the giant leader said, leaning down until its massive stone face was level with mine. We smell the old melodies in your blood. Your grandmother was wise. She taught you the lullabies, hoping someday the agreement could be renewed. I'm not Cherokee enough, I protested. I'm mixed blood, 3 generations removed. Blood quantum matters less than heart knowledge, the giant said. Do you love these mountains? Yes. Will you protect the sacred places from those who would violate them? Yes. But will you learn the full songs and sing us back to deep dreaming? The chamber had grown silent, except for the slow breathing of Kaf. Ancient stone guardians. Even Jake was still, waiting for my answer. I thought of my grandmother's stories, her warnings about places where the mountain breathed wrong. I thought of 3 dead spelunkers who'd ignored Cherokee warnings. I thought of millions of people who would die or be displaced if these giants fully awakened. If I agree, I said carefully, what happens to the missing people? To Mike, Sarah, and Tom? They remain with us, the giant said. Their stone sleep is eternal now. They are part of the mountain's protection. That's not acceptable. The giant's eyes glowed like deep cave pools. You would bargain with us, grandson? Yes. I stood straighter, calling on 17 years of ranger authority. I'm asking for mercy as part of the new agreement. If I learn the songs and help renew the ancient protections, I want the 3 spelunkers released. The giants exchanged looks if beings made of stone could be said to exchange looks. A rumbling conversation in Cherokee, too fast and complex for me to follow. Finally, the leader spoke. One may be returned. Choose which one. All 3 or no agreement. The chamber shook with the giant's laughter. You have your grandmother's stubbornness. Very well. All 3 will be restored, but they will remember nothing of this place, and they must never return to any sacred cave. Agreed. Then sing, grandson of the singer. Sing us to sleep with the old lullabies, and we will teach you the full songs in your dreams. I closed my eyes and remembered my grandmother's voice, her Cherokee words that had lulled me to sleep as a child, the melodies that had always seemed to echo with power I didn't understand. I began to sing. The words came easier than they should have, as if the giants themselves were teaching me the proper pronunciation. The ancient Cherokee flowed off my tongue like water, like wind through mountain passes. Around me, the stone guardians began to settle back into their sleeping positions. Their massive bodies relaxed, their eyes closed, their breathing slowed to match the rhythm of the mountain itself. The chamber grew quiet, peaceful. When I opened my eyes, Jake was smiling. At the chamber's entrance, 3 confused but very much alive spelunkers sat wrapped in emergency blankets that hadn't been there moments before. The giants were asleep again, looking exactly like natural rock formations. But now I could see them for what they truly were. Ancient guardians dreaming of protection, waiting for the songs that would keep them in peaceful slumber. How long will the agreement last? Nust, I asked Jake quietly. As long as someone sings the songs, he said. As long as the sacred places are respected. And if they're not? Jake looked at the sleeping giants with deep respect. Then the mountains wake up. The official report listed the 3 missing spelunkers as victims of a temporary cave-in that trapped them for 36 hours. Mild hypothermia, some confusion, no serious injuries. The limestone cave system was declared geologically unstable and closed to public access indefinitely. Mike, Sarah, and Tom remembered nothing after entering the cave. They had vague memories of being cold, of waiting in darkness, of hearing distant voices singing. The Park Service recommended counseling for traumatic stress. None of them ever went caving again. Jake Whitehorse helped me file the paperwork and coordinate with the Cherokee Nation. Officially, the closure was for safety reasons. Unofficially, the tribal council increased their protective ceremonies around sacred sites throughout the mountains. I learned the full songs that winter. They came to me in dreams, taught by my grandmother's voice and older voices that spoke from deep stone places. Cherokee words that weren't just language but living agreements between humans and the spirits of the mountains. Every month, I hike to the sealed cave entrance and sing the ancient lullabies. The stone giants sleep peacefully, Their dreams protecting sacred places throughout the Cherokee homeland. Sometimes, other rangers ask why I spend so much time in that particular valley, why I'm so adamant about keeping cavers away from certain limestone formations. I tell them it's for geological safety reasons. But on quiet nights, when the fog rolls thick through Cataloochee Valley, I can hear them breathing. 20 stone guardians sleeping fitfully, their rest growing lighter each year as more people push deeper into wild places they don't understand. The Cherokee elder who called for my help that first day visits me sometimes. Marie Swimmer, keeper of the old stories, granddaughter of shamans who made the original agreements. Your grandmother would be proud, she told me last month. You're keeping the balance. For how long? I asked. As long as necessary, she said. The giants are patient. They understand that the modern world makes keeping the old agreements difficult. But patience has limits. She's right. Every year, more spelunkers file permits for caves throughout the mountains. More developers push closer to sacred sites. More people forget that some places are meant to remain hidden. I train new rangers when I can, teaching them to recognize signs of sacred spaces without explaining why. I work with Cherokee cultural liaisons to identify and protect sites that maps don't show. I sing the old songs and hope they're enough, but I also prepare for the day they might not be. Because I've seen what happens when ancient guardians wake up hungry. I've heard the sound of mountains reshaping themselves. I've watched people turn to stone for violating agreements they never knew existed. The giants still sleep under the mountains. They dream of protection, of keeping sacred places safe from those who would violate them with bright lights and metal, tools, and endless curiosity. They dream peacefully, for now. But dreams can become nightmares when the songs stop. If you're ever exploring the Appalachian caves, and you hear breathing that isn't yours, remember this. Some places are older than maps, older than laws, older than the governments that claim authority over them. Respect the Cherokee warnings. Some places are meant to stay hidden. The mountains remember agreements older than park boundaries. And the stone giants sleep lightly, waiting for someone to sing them back to dreams. My name is Margaret Caldwell, but everyone calls me Maggie. I've been a ranger here in the Daniel Boone National Forest for 21 years now, and I've seen just about everything these Kentucky mountains can throw at you. Bear attacks, flash floods, folks getting lost for days in the thick woods. But I specialize in keeping families safe, especially the children. See, I know what it's like to lose a child in these mountains. My great-grandfather worked the coal mines back when they were running full steam. My grandfather, too. Even my daddy spent some years underground before the mines started closing down. It's in my blood, this connection to these hills and hollows. But it was my own little girl, Sarah, who made me understand just how dangerous these old mining areas can be. She was 8 years old when the accident happened, playing too close to an old mine shaft that should have been sealed better. The ground just gave way. By the time we found her, it was too late. That was 15 years ago, and I became a ranger the next year. Figured if I couldn't save my own daughter, maybe I could save someone else's. People around here know me pretty well. When a family goes missing on a camping trip, I'm usually the one they call. I've found lost kids hiding in caves, scared and hungry but alive. I've talked teenagers out of exploring dangerous mine shafts. I know every inch of these mountains, every old mining road, every abandoned coal camp. That's why when folks started telling stories about Harlan's Hollow, I didn't pay much attention. Harlan's Hollow used to be a coal camp back in the 50s. 23 families lived there, working for the Harlan Mining Company. Good jobs, steady pay, little company houses all lined up, neat and tidy. Kids playing in the dirt roads, mothers hanging laundry on lines strung between the houses. A real community. Then came September 15th, 1952. Methane gas built up in the main shaft. One spark was all it took. The explosion killed 31 children and their parents in an instant. Buried them so deep we never got all the bodies out. The company just sealed up the mines and walked away, left the families' houses to rot. Now, 27 years later, it's nothing but foundation stones and rusted metal, all grown over with vines and saplings. Most folks avoid the place. Say they hear things. Children laughing, kids calling to each other to come play. The old-timers cross themselves when they talk about it. But I'm a practical woman. Sounds carry funny in these hollows. Wind through old mine shafts can sound like voices if you're not careful. And people's minds play tricks on them, especially when they know a place has a sad history. At least, that's what I told myself until September of 1979. I was leading a family camping trip that weekend. The Hendersons from Lexington, mom, dad, and twin 8-year-old girls named Amy and Beth, they'd requested a historical camping experience where their girls could learn about Kentucky's mining heritage. Harlan's Hollow seemed perfect. Safe enough, with all the mine shafts properly sealed and full of history. I should have known better. The morning we drove up the old logging road to the hollow, mist was hanging thick in the valleys. Early fall in Kentucky is like that. Warm days, cool nights, and fog that pools in the low places like spilled milk. The girls were excited, chattering in the back seat about camping and s'mores and ghost stories. "Are there really ghosts here, Miss Maggie?" Amy asked as we bumped along the rough road. "Just old stories, honey," I told her. "Nothing to worry about." Beth, the quieter twin, was staring out the window at the trees. "It feels lonely here," she said softly. Her mother laughed. "That's just because it's so isolated, sweetheart. That's what makes it special for camping." When we reached the hollow, I helped them set up their tent near where the old company store used to stand. Just foundation stones now, but you could still see where the building had been. The girls ran around exploring while their parents got the camping gear organized. Normal kid stuff, picking up interesting rocks, chasing a squirrel, laughing and calling to each other. Everything seemed perfectly normal. That first night, sitting around the campfire, I told them about the mining families who used to live here. How hard they worked, how close-knit the community was. I kept it light, didn't mention the disaster. These were little girls, after all. They didn't need to hear about explosions and death. But as I was talking, I noticed something odd. The girls kept looking over my shoulder, toward the old mine entrance about 50 yards away. Looking and smiling like they were waving at someone. "What are you looking at, girls?" their father asked. "The other kids," Amy said matter-of-factly. "They're playing hide and seek." I turned around. There was nothing there but darkness and the old wooden barrier we'd put up to keep people out of the sealed mine. "I don't see any other kids," I said gently. "It's just us here tonight." Beth shook her head. "They're right there. Don't you see them? They're waving." A chill ran down my spine, but I kept my voice calm. Sometimes shadows can look like people, especially in firelight. It's just your imagination. But the girls seemed so certain. They kept waving and giggling, like they were having a conversation with invisible friends. Finally, I walked over to where they were looking. Nothing. Just the old mine entrance, sealed tight with concrete and steel barriers like it had been for decades. Still, as I walked back to the fire, I could have sworn I heard something, faint and far away, like children laughing. The wind, I told myself. Just the wind. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of the Henderson girls giggling outside their tent. Nothing unusual about that. Kids are always up early when they're camping. But something in their voices made me sit up and listen more carefully. They weren't just giggling, they were talking to someone. "We can't come play right now," Amy was saying. "Our mom and dad are still sleeping. Maybe after breakfast," Beth added. "Miss Maggie says we have to stay close to camp." I unzipped my sleeping bag and crawled out of my tent. The girls were sitting on a fallen log at the edge of our campsite, facing toward the old mine. They were still in their pajamas, their hair messy from sleep, but they were wide awake and alert. "Good morning, girls," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Who are you talking to?" "The kids from yesterday," Amy said without looking at me. "They came back to play." "They said they live here," Beth added. "They know all the best hiding spots." I looked where they were looking. Nothing but morning mist and the shadows of trees. But the girls were so focused, so engaged, like they were having a real conversation. "Girls, there aren't any other children here. It's just our family on this camping trip," Amy said, finally turning to look at me. "They told us their names and everything. That's Johnny, and that's Mary, and the little one is Susie." My blood went cold. Johnny, Mary, and Susie Morrison. I knew those names from the disaster records I'd studied. 3 children from the same family, ages 6, 8, and 10. all killed in the mine explosion. But there was no way these girls could know that. Amy, where did you hear those names? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She shrugged. They told us. They want to show us where they used to play. They said there's a really good climbing tree behind the old houses. Mrs. Henderson emerged from the tent, rubbing her eyes. Morning, Maggie. Girls, what are you doing up so early? Talking to our new friends, Beth said happily. Mrs. Henderson looked confused. What friends, honey? The kids who live here, Amy explained patiently, like her mother was being slow. They're really nice. They know lots of games. Mr. Henderson had woken up too and was listening from inside the tent. Maggie, are there other families camping here? No, I said quietly. We're the only ones. But the girls kept insisting. They described their new friends in detail, what they were wearing, how they talked, what games they wanted to play. Old-fashioned clothes, they said, funny words, and they all seemed to be around 8 to 10 years old. After breakfast, I decided to do a thorough check of the area. Maybe there was a logical explanation. Maybe another family had hiked in from a different direction. Maybe local kids had walked up from the valley, though that would be a long hike for children. I spent an hour walking the perimeter of the hollow, checking all the old trails and logging roads. No other cars. No other campsites. No signs that anyone else had been here recently. But I did find something that made my skin crawl. Near the foundation of what used to be the Morrison family house, someone had arranged a collection of toys in a neat little circle. Old toys. A metal truck with paint worn off to bare metal. A baby doll with a cracked face and hair falling out. A wooden top. A set of jacks. The toys looked like they'd been buried for decades, then recently dug up and carefully cleaned. But who would do that? And why arrange them like children were about to sit down and play? I took pictures with my camera, then gathered up the toys. They felt wrong in my hands, too cold, too heavy, like they were made of something denser than wood and metal should be. When I got back to camp, the Henderson girls were drawing with crayons and paper their mother had brought. I looked over Amy's shoulder and nearly dropped the bag of toys. She was drawing children. Lots of them, maybe 30 or more, all standing together in front of a building that looked exactly like the old company store. The children in the drawing were wearing clothes from the 1950 seconds, simple dresses for the girls, overalls for the boys. And at the bottom of the paper, in careful 8-year-old handwriting, were names. Johnny Morrison, Mary Morrison, Susie Morrison, Billy Fletcher, Emma Sue Caldwell, Tommy Prater. Names I recognized from the disaster records, names that had been carved on the memorial stone down in the valley. Names these girls had no way of knowing. Amy, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Where did you get these names? From our friends, she said without looking up from her drawing. They told me to write them down so we wouldn't forget. Beth was drawing too. Her picture showed the inside of what looked like a mine shaft. Dark tunnels stretching back into the mountain. And standing in those tunnels, barely visible in the crayon shadows, were more children. They want to show us their special place, Beth said. They said it's really fun to play in there, like a big cave. No, I said firmly. Absolutely not. Those old mines are dangerous. You girls are not to go near them. Do you understand? Both girls looked up at me with surprise. But Miss Maggie, our friends said it was safe. They play there all the time. Your friends don't exist, I said, more sharply than I meant to. You're imagining things. Amy's face crumpled like I'd slapped her. We're not making it up. They're real. Tell her, Beth. Beth nodded vigorously. They're as real as you are, Miss Maggie. They just want to play with us. They said they've been lonely. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson were watching this exchange with growing concern. Maggie, what's going on here? Mr. Henderson asked. I showed them the toys I'd found and the drawings their daughters had made. I explained about the names, how they matched children who had died in a mining accident, almost 30 years ago. Names that weren't written down anywhere. These girls could have seen them. Maybe they heard the names somewhere else, Mrs. Henderson suggested. From other campers or in town? But I knew that wasn't right. These weren't famous names. They weren't in any tourist brochures or local history books. The only place these names existed was in official disaster records that most people had never seen. As the day went on, it got worse. The girls began using words I'd never heard them use before. Old-fashioned expressions that kids in the 1950 seconds might have known. They talked about games like Kick the Can and Red Rover that weren't popular anymore. They mentioned radio shows instead of television, and they kept insisting their friends were there, playing with them, talking to them. I tried to keep the family busy with hiking and nature education, but the girls' attention always drifted back to their invisible playmates. They would stop in the middle of conversations to listen to something only they could hear. They would giggle at jokes no one else understood. That evening, as we sat around the campfire again, I decided to test something. "Girls, ask your friends about the mine accident," I said. "Ask them what happened here." Both girls went very still and quiet. After a long moment, Amy said, "They don't want to talk about that. It makes them sad." They said something about a big noise, and then everything went dark, Beth whispered. They said they woke up and everyone was gone except each other. I felt like someone had poured ice water down my spine. That was exactly what would have happened. The explosion would have been instantaneous. The children wouldn't have understood what hit them. But how could these girls know that? As the sun set and darkness settled over the hollow, I made a decision. We were leaving first thing in the morning. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't safe for children. But when I told the Henderson family we'd be cutting the trip short, their daughters started crying. "We can't leave," Amy sobbed. "Our friends need us. They've been alone for so long. Please, Miss Maggie," Beth pleaded. "Just one more day. They said they have something special to show us tomorrow." No, I thought. Whatever those things are, they're not getting another chance with these children. I should have trusted that instinct. I should have packed us up and driven away that very night, because in the darkness beyond our campfire, I was starting to hear them too. Children laughing, children calling to each other. Children who had been dead for 27 years. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard whispers outside my tent, soft voices calling Amy and Beth's names, gentle laughter that seemed to come from the direction of the sealed mine. Around 3 in the morning, I heard footsteps. Small footsteps, like children trying to sneak around camp without making noise. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped my tent flap as quietly as I could. The Henderson girls were gone. Their tent was empty, sleeping bags thrown aside like they'd gotten up in a hurry. I could see small, bare footprints in the dew-wet grass leading away from camp toward the old mine entrance. My heart hammering, I followed the prints. They led straight to the wooden barrier that blocked the mine shaft. But the barrier was still in place, still locked. No way the girls could have gotten past it. The footprints just stopped, like the children had vanished into thin air. "Amy, Beth," I called softly, not wanting to wake their parents, but desperate to find the girls. "We're here, Miss Maggie." Amy's voice came from somewhere ahead of me, beyond the barrier, from inside the sealed mine. "It's really fun in here." Beth's voice echoed strangely, like she was shouting from deep underground. Our friends showed us a secret way in. That was impossible. I'd inspected that barrier myself just yesterday. Solid wood backed by steel mesh, anchored in concrete. There was no way 2 8-year-old girls could have moved it. But somehow they were inside. I ran back to camp and shook Mr. and Mrs. Henderson awake. "The girls are gone. They're in the mine somehow." Mrs. Henderson shot out of her sleeping bag like she'd been electrocuted. "What do you mean they're in the mine? You said it was sealed." "It is sealed," I said, already grabbing my emergency radio. "But I can hear them inside. We need help. Now." But when I tried to call for backup, all I got was static. The radio worked fine yesterday, but now it was completely dead. The Henderson cell phones had no signal either, nothing unusual for this remote area, but frustrating when we needed help. "There has to be another way in," Mr. Henderson said, pulling on his boots. "Maybe they found an old ventilation shaft or something." I knew every inch of this area, and there wasn't another entrance. But I grabbed my emergency gear anyway, rope, flashlights, first aid kit, and led the panicked parents back to the mine. "Amy, Beth, can you hear me?" Mrs. Henderson called. "Hi, Mom," came Amy's cheerful voice, definitely from inside the mine. "We're playing the best game ever. There are so many kids here." 31 of them, Beth added excitedly. "Just like in Amy's drawing." 31. Exactly the number of children who died in the explosion. I examined the barrier more carefully with my flashlight. Still solid, still locked. But now I noticed something that made my blood freeze. The wood around the edges was wet, soaked through like it had been raining. But it hadn't rained, and the wetness wasn't water. It was the color of coal dust mixed with something dark. "We need to get these boards off," Mr. Henderson said, pulling at the barrier. "My daughters are in there." "Wait," I said. "Something's not right about this." But he wasn't listening. He was grabbing tools from my pack, trying to pry off the wooden boards. The first board came loose easier than it should have, like the nails were rotted through. Behind it was darkness, so complete it seemed solid. And from that darkness came the sound of children singing. Not just Amy and Beth, but many voices, singing an old song I half remembered from when I was little. "Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies." "That's them," Mrs. Henderson cried. "That's my babies." She pushed past me toward the opening, but I grabbed her arm. "No, don't go in there." "Let go of me. Those are my children." "Listen to me," I said urgently. "Those children in there, they're not alone with Amy and Beth. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down." The singing stopped abruptly, followed by the sound of children laughing and clapping. But the laughter went on too long, got too loud, echoed in ways that didn't make sense. "Mommy?" Amy's voice called from the darkness. But it sounded different now, older somehow. "Will you come play with us? Our friends want to meet you." "We're having so much fun," Beth's voice added. "We don't want to come out, ever." Mrs. Henderson tried to push toward the opening again, but now I could hear something else in the darkness. Footsteps. Lots of them, like a crowd of children walking through the tunnels, coming closer. "Please come in, Mommy." Amy's voice again, but it was wrong now, too formal, too polite. "All the children want to meet you. We've been waiting such a long time for new friends." "Mr. Henderson had gone very still beside me. "That doesn't sound like Amy," he whispered. No, it didn't. It sounded like Amy was repeating words someone else had taught her to say. "Amy, Beth, you need to come out right now." I called into the darkness. "Your parents are worried about you." Silence for a long moment. Then, "We can't come out, Miss Maggie. Our friends said if we leave, we'll forget about them. And they'll be alone again. We don't want them to be alone. They're just children," another voice added. Beth's voice, but with an accent I didn't recognize. Old-fashioned mountain dialect that hadn't been spoken around here for decades. "They don't understand about the lonely dark." That wasn't Beth talking. That was someone else, using Beth's voice. Mrs. Henderson was crying now, reaching toward the opening. "Beth, honey, that doesn't sound like you. Are you okay in there?" "I'm fine, Mommy. Better than fine. Johnny taught me a game called hide and go seek. Want to play? You just close your eyes and count to 31. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it into the opening. The beam seemed to get swallowed by the darkness after just a few feet, like the tunnel was filled with something thicker than air. But in that brief moment of illumination, I saw them. Children, dozens of them, standing in the tunnel just beyond the light's reach. Pale, thin children in old-fashioned clothes, holding hands and staring at us with dark, empty eyes. And in the front, holding hands with the others, were Amy and Beth Henderson. But they looked wrong, faded somehow, like they were becoming transparent. "We're teaching them the games we used to play," one of the pale children said in Amy's voice. "Hide and seek, tag, ring around the rosy, and the best game of all, staying together forever." I yanked Mrs. Henderson back from the opening. "We're not going in there. Whatever's happened to the girls, going into that mine won't help them." "Then what do we do?" "Mr. Henderson demanded. "Those are our daughters." I wished I knew. In 21 years as a ranger, I'd faced mountain lions, flash floods, forest fires, and every kind of natural disaster these hills could throw at me. But I'd never faced anything like this. The dead children of Harlan's Bersither Hollow had found new playmates, and they weren't planning to let them go. I sent the Hendersons back to camp to gather our gear while I stayed by the mine entrance, talking to their daughters, trying to understand what had happened to them, trying to figure out how to get them back. "Amy, Beth, I need you to listen to me very carefully." I called into the darkness. "You need to remember who you are. You're Amy and Beth Henderson. You live in Lexington. You came here camping with your mom and dad." "We remember," Amy's voice replied, but it was getting fainter. But our friends helped us remember other things too. Better things. Like how to play in the dark, how to find treasure in the deep places, how to stay together always and never be lonely. We learned a new song, Beth added, her voice echoing strangely. Want to hear it? Before I could answer, they started singing. Not just the two of them, but all the children in the mine. 33 voices now, singing a lullaby I'd heard before but couldn't place. Hush now, baby, don't you cry, Mama's gonna sing you a lullaby. Down in the dark where the coal dust flies, close your eyes and go to sleep. It was a song my grandmother used to sing to me, a song that mining families sang to their children back when the mines were running, a song that should have died with the families who knew it, but somehow these dead children remembered it, and somehow they were teaching it to Amy and Beth. That's enough, I said firmly. Girls, you need to come out now. We're leaving. The singing stopped. For a moment, there was complete silence from inside the mine. Then a different voice spoke. Not Amy or Beth, but a child's voice with an old mountain accent. They can't leave now, ma'am. They're part of our family. We've been waiting so long for new sisters to play with. Who are you? I demanded. I'm Johnny Morrison, ma'am. This here's my sister Mary, and my little sister, Susie. We've been taking care of the other children since the big sleep came, but it's been awful lonesome with just us. Johnny Morrison, the oldest of the Morrison children who died in the explosion. He would have been 10 years old when he died, old enough to feel responsible for the other children. Johnny, I said gently, you and the other children have been dead for 27 years. The explosion that happened here in 1952, 2 died in it. Silence again. Then, no ma'am, we just been sleeping in the deep dark. But we're awake now, and we got new friends to take care of. Amy and Beth are staying with us. They have their own family, Johnny. Their parents love them and want them back. Families stay together, Johnny's voice said stubbornly. That's what families do, and we're their family now. I heard the Hendersons coming back, their voices tight with panic as they called their daughters' names. But when they reached the mine entrance, Mrs. Henderson gasped. Oh my God, Maggie, look. I turned and saw what she was seeing. More children were emerging from the woods around us. Pale, translucent children in old-fashioned clothes, walking toward the mine entrance. They moved silently, like they were floating just above the ground. But these weren't the children from inside the mine. These were different children from different mining disasters, different coal camps. Children who had died in cave-ins and explosions all across these mountains over the past century. They were all coming to Harlan's Hollow. What's happening? Mr. Henderson whispered. They're gathering, I realized. The dead children from all the old mining disasters. Johnny and his friends are calling them here. More and more pale figures emerged from the darkness. Some wore clothes from the 1,920 seconds. Others from the 1,940 seconds and 50 seconds. All children, all with the same dark, empty eyes and translucent skin, and they were all walking toward the mine entrance where Amy and Beth were trapped. Why? Mrs. Henderson asked, her voice breaking. I thought about the drawings the girls had made, the 31 names they'd somehow known, the toys that had been arranged like an invitation to play. They want to make their own family, I said. All the children who died in the mines, together forever. And they want Amy and Beth to be part of it. From inside the mine came Amy's voice again, but it was barely recognizable now. Faint and echoing, like she was speaking from very far away. Miss Maggie? I can see them. All the children. There are hundreds of them. They're all holding hands, and they want us to hold hands too. Don't do it, Amy, I called. Don't take their hands. But Beth's voice was already fading as she answered. It feels nice, Miss Maggie. Warm and safe, like we'll never be alone again. The pale children had reached the mine entrance now, and they were filing into the darkness. One by one, dozens of them, disappearing into the sealed mine that should have been impossible to enter. I made a decision that would either save the Henderson girls or get me killed. I grabbed my strongest flashlight and pushed past Mr. Henderson toward the opening. What are you doing? He shouted. Going after them, I said. Stay here and try to radio for help. If I'm not back in an hour, find another way down this mountain and get the authorities. You can't go in there alone, but I was already stepping through the opening into the mine. The darkness swallowed me immediately. My flashlight beam seemed weak and pathetic against the absolute blackness that pressed in from all sides. The air was thick and hard to breathe, tasting of coal dust and something else, something rotten. "Amy? Beth?" I called. "Miss Maggie?" Amy's voice came from somewhere ahead of me, down the main tunnel. "You shouldn't have come in here. Our friends don't like grown-ups very much." I followed her voice, moving carefully through the tunnel. The wooden support beams were rotted and sagging, and water dripped constantly from the ceiling. This mine should have been completely flooded and collapsed after almost 30 years, but somehow it was still passable. As I walked deeper, my flashlight began to pick up something that made my blood freeze. Bones. Small bones, scattered along the tunnel floor. The remains of the children who had died in the explosion, never properly buried. And sitting among the bones, playing with toys made of finger bones and skulls, were Amy and Beth Henderson. But they were different now. Pale and translucent like the other children. Their eyes were dark and empty, and when they smiled at me, I could see the tunnel wall through their bodies. "Look, Miss Maggie," Amy said cheerfully, holding up a doll made of human ribs. "Susie taught me how to make toys from the deep down things. We don't need the up there toys anymore," Beth added. "The down here toys are much better. Want to play with us?" Around them, the dead children of Harlan's Hollow sat in a circle, playing their eternal games with the bones of their own bodies. And beyond them, stretching back into the deeper darkness, were hundreds more children from mining disasters across the mountains. All of them dead. All of them waiting for Amy and Beth to join their games forever. "Girls, you need to come with me right now," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Your parents are waiting." "Can't leave," Johnny Morrison's voice said from the darkness. "Family stays together, and they're our family now." That's when I understood. These children had been trapped here for decades, alone and scared, clinging to each other for comfort. They didn't understand that they were dead. They only knew they were lonely, and that loneliness had twisted them into something hungry and desperate. And they had found living children to ease that loneliness. But I also understood something else, something that might be the key to saving Amy and Beth. I thought about my own daughter, Sarah, about how she died, and how I'd spent 15 years trying to save other children because I couldn't save her. "Johnny," I said into the darkness, "I want to tell you about my little girl." Her name was Sarah, I said. Sitting down among the bones and pale children like this was the most normal thing in the world. She was 8 years old, just like some of you. And she died in these mountains too, in an accident like yours. The dead children went very still, listening. "I know what it feels like to be alone," I continued. "I know what it feels like when someone you love is gone and you can't follow them. I've been lonely for 15 years, missing my daughter every single day." Amy and Beth were looking at me now, and I could see something changing in their dark eyes. A flicker of recognition. "But you know, what I learned," I said. "Being lonely doesn't give us the right to trap other children. Even when we miss someone so much, it feels like dying. We can't force new people to stay with us forever." "But they want to stay," Johnny's voice protested. "They said so." "No," I said gently. "They said that because you made them forget who they really are. Look at them, Johnny. Really look. They're fading away. You're not saving them from loneliness. You're stealing their lives." I stood up and walked over to Amy and Beth, kneeling down between them. Up close, I could see that they were barely solid anymore, like they were becoming ghosts themselves. "Amy, Beth, I need you to remember something very important. What are your parents' names?" Amy looked confused. I don't. "Your mother's name is Susan," I said firmly. "Your father's name is David. You have a dog named Rusty and a cat named Whiskers. You live in a blue house on Elm Street in Lexington." "I remember. The blue house," Beth whispered, and suddenly she looked a little more solid. "That's right. And your parents are outside right now, crying because they miss you. They love you more than anything in the world." Around us, the dead children were growing agitated. Their pale forms flickered like candle flames in a wind. "Don't listen to her," a girl's voice said. "She wants to take you away from us. She wants us to be alone again." But I kept talking to Amy and Beth, reminding them of their real lives, their real families. And slowly, they began to remember. Color came back to their cheeks. Their eyes cleared. "I want to go home," Amy said suddenly. her voice small and scared. "Me too," Beth whispered. "I want Mommy." The dead children around us wailed, a sound like wind through broken stones. Some of them began to fade, becoming transparent and then disappearing entirely. Others pressed closer, their dark eyes desperate. "Please don't leave us," Johnny begged. "We've been alone so long." And that's when I heard another voice. A voice I'd been dreaming about for 15 years. "It's okay, Johnny." I turned and saw her, my Sarah, standing in the tunnel behind me. But she wasn't pale and desperate like the other dead children. She glowed with a soft, warm light. "Sarah?" I whispered. She smiled, the same sweet smile I remembered. "Hi, Mama." "How?" "I've been watching," she said, "waiting for you to be ready." "Ready for what?" "To let me help you help them." Sarah walked past me toward the circle of dead children. Where her light touched them, they began to change. The hunger and desperation faded from their faces, replaced by peace. "You don't have to be alone," she told them. "But you can't keep other children here with you. That's not how families work." "But where will we go?" Susie Morrison asked, her voice small and scared. "Somewhere better," Sarah said. "Somewhere you can play and be happy, without hurting anyone. But you have to let Amy and Beth go first." One by one, the dead children began to nod. They understood now. They gathered around Amy and Beth, touching them gently, saying goodbye. "Thank you for playing with us," Johnny said. "We're sorry we scared you." Amy and Beth hugged each of the pale children, and with each hug, the dead children grew brighter, more peaceful. "Take care of each other," Beth said, wise beyond her 8 years. Then Sarah turned to me. "Mama, it's time for you to stop blaming yourself. I'm okay. I'm happy. And I need you to be happy too." "I miss you so much," I whispered. "I know. But missing me doesn't mean you have to carry all that sadness forever. You've saved so many children because you loved me. That's beautiful. But now you need to save yourself too." She hugged me, and for a moment I felt 8 years old again myself, safe in the arms of someone who loved me completely. Then she was leading the dead, children away, into a light that grew brighter and brighter until I had to close my eyes. When I opened them again, we were alone in the tunnel, me and Amy and Beth, solid and real and alive. "Come on, girls," I said. "Let's go home." We walked out of the mine together. The darkness that had seemed so thick and oppressive was just regular darkness now. The bones were gone. The rotting support beams had collapsed, sealing the tunnel behind us. Outside, the Hendersons were waiting with tears in their eyes. They grabbed their daughters and held them tight, and I stood back, watching the reunion with a peace I hadn't felt in 15 years. Later, after we'd packed up and driven back to town, after the Hendersons had gone home to Lexington with their girls, I returned to Harlan's Hollow one more time. The mine entrance was completely sealed now, buried under tons of rock that had fallen naturally. The old foundation stones were still there, but they didn't feel haunted anymore. They just felt like what they were, the remains of a community that had lived and died and moved on. I planted a small garden there, with flowers for each of the 31 children who had died in the disaster. And in the center, one flower for my Sarah, who had finally been able to help other children find their way home. That was over 40 years ago now. I'm retired from the ranger service, but I still keep an eye on the old mining areas, still help families stay safe in these mountains. And sometimes, when I'm walking through the woods at twilight, I hear children laughing in the distance. Not the desperate, hungry laughter of trapped spirits, but the joyful laughter of children at play. They're not alone anymore, and neither am I. But if you're ever camping in these mountains, and your children start talking to friends you can't see, friends with old-fashioned names and sad stories, well, you might want to pack up and find a different campsite, because some places remember their tragedies too well, and sometimes the dead still miss the living enough to try to keep them forever. The mountains never forget their children, all of them, even the ones who never got to grow up. My name is Jackson Cumberland, but everyone just calls me Jack. I've been a ranger here in Jefferson National Forest for 15 years now, and my family's been hunting these Virginia mountains for 7 generations. My grandfather taught me to track when I was barely knee-high to a grasshopper, and there ain't an animal in these woods that can hide from me for long. The Devil's Backbone Ridge is my territory. 30 miles of wilderness where no roads go. Just old deer trails and rocky paths that'll break your ankle if you're not careful. It's beautiful country, don't get me wrong. Thick forests of oak and pine, hidden valleys that maybe 10 people have ever seen, and ridgelines that stretch out like sleeping giants. But it's got a reputation too. Folks have been going missing up there since before my great-great-grandfather's time. I never paid much mind to the stories. Cherokee legends about forest giants. Old tales from the 1800s about wild men attacking hunting parties. I figured it was just bears and bad luck. In 15 years of search and rescue, I'd found every missing person who'd gotten lost in my sector. Sometimes they were hurt, sometimes they were dead, but I always found them. That was my job, and I was good at it. November of 1981 started out cold. First snow was already dusting the high ridges, and hunting season was in full swing. I was married to my high school sweetheart Sarah, had 2 boys who were just getting old enough to learn tracking themselves. Life was good, simple. I thought I knew everything there was to know about these mountains. That's when 3 bow hunters went missing. Tom Bradley, Mike Chen, and Dave Morrison, all experienced outdoorsmen with hunting licenses going back 20 years. They'd gotten permits for a week-long hunt in the deep wilderness, planning to camp near the old Cherokee Grove where the biggest bucks like to hide. Good hunters. The kind who knew how to respect the woods and stay safe. They were supposed to check in by radio every evening at 6. First night, nothing. Second night, silence. By the third day, their wives were calling my station, scared and angry. I wasn't too worried at first. Radios fail, especially when you get back in those deep hollows where the ridgelines block signals. But then we picked up their emergency beacon, and that's when things got strange. The signal was coming from Devil's Backbone itself, the highest, roughest part of the ridge where no sane person would try to hunt. I grabbed my pack and headed out with my partner Mike Sutherland. Mike was younger than me, only been a ranger for 5 years, but he was solid. We'd found lost hikers together plenty of times before. This should have been routine. The hike up to their last known position took us 4 hours, climbing steep trails through forest so thick the afternoon sun barely touched the ground. The higher we got, the quieter it became. That should have been my first, a warning sign, but I was focused on covering ground and finding those hunters. We found their base camp in a clearing about 2 miles from Devil's Backbone proper. What we found there made my blood run cold. The campsite looked like a tornado had hit it. Not wind damage, something with incredible strength had torn through that camp. Their heavy canvas tent was shredded into ribbons. Camp chairs were twisted into shapes that didn't make sense. A thick pine tree, maybe 8 inches across, was snapped clean in half about 6 feet off the ground. What the hell could do this? Mike whispered, picking up pieces of a camp stove that looked like it had been stomped flat. I was staring at something even stranger. In the soft dirt around their fire ring, I could see tracks. Not bear tracks, not human tracks, something in between. They were huge, maybe 18 inches long, shaped like human feet but way too big. The depth of the impressions told me whatever made them had to weigh at least 600 or 700 pounds. "Jack," Mike called from the edge of the clearing. His voice was tight. "You need to see this." I walked over to where he was standing at the tree line. There, carved deep into the bark of an old oak tree about 12 feet off the ground, were claw marks. Not bear claws, these were too big, too deliberate. They looked almost like fingers, but fingers strong enough to gouge 4-inch deep grooves in solid wood. The woods around us were dead silent. No birds, no squirrels, no insects. Just our breathing and the wind in the trees. In 15 years of working these mountains, I'd never heard quiet like that. I knelt down by the strange footprints, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The tracks were clear as day in the soft earth, definitely not human, but not like any animal I knew either. They showed a walking gait, heel to toe, like a person. But each print was massive, with what looked like long toes that had left, deep impressions in the dirt. "We need to call this in," Mike said, reaching for his radio. I nodded, but when he tried to raise the station, all we got was static, mixed with something that sounded almost like growling. Low, rumbling sounds that seemed to come from the radio itself. "Equipment's acting up," I muttered, checking my own radio. Same thing. Static and those weird low-frequency sounds that made my teeth ache. We decided to follow the tracks. They led away from the destroyed campsite, heading uphill toward Devil's Backbone Ridge. The trail was easy to follow at first. The huge footprints were clear in the soft forest floor, spaced about 4 feet apart like something with very long legs was walking casually through the woods. After about a mile, we found Dave Morrison. He was sitting against a tree, still alive but staring off into space like he was seeing something that wasn't there. When we called his name, he looked right through us. No injuries we could see, but he kept mumbling the same words over and over. So big, it looked right at me. Mike stayed with Dave while I followed the tracks further. They led to a small clearing where I found something that made my hands shake. Someone, or something, had built a shelter. Not the kind of lean-to a human might make, but a structure built from entire tree trunks. Logs that would take 4 men to lift were stacked together like Lincoln logs, creating a dome-shaped shelter big enough for something 9 feet tall. The engineering was perfect. No ropes, no nails, just careful placement and balance. Whatever built this knew what it was doing. But the trees used in construction had been ripped from the ground, roots and all. The raw strength required was beyond anything human. I was studying the shelter when I heard Mike scream. I ran back toward the clearing, my heart hammering in my chest. I found Mike kneeling next to Dave, who was now unconscious. But Mike wasn't looking at Dave. He was staring up into the trees above us. It was watching us, Mike whispered. Something big, moving through the canopy like it weighed nothing. When I looked up, it was gone, but Jack, it was huge, bigger than any bear, moving like a man. I looked up into the thick branches overhead. The trees were old growth, with trunks wide enough and branches strong enough to support something heavy. And there, about 30 feet up, I could see where massive limbs had been broken, creating a highway through the treetops. We needed to get Dave out of there and back to medical help. But carrying an unconscious man 4 miles down a mountain trail would take hours, and darkness was coming fast. The temperature was dropping, and those thick clouds moving in promised snow. As we made a stretcher from broken tent poles and a sleeping bag, I kept thinking about those tracks. Bears don't build shelters. Bears don't break trees 12 feet off the ground. And bears definitely don't move through treetops like some kind of giant monkey. We were halfway back to the main trail when we heard it. A sound that raised every hair on my body, part howl, part roar, with something almost like words mixed in. It came from somewhere behind us, echoing off the ridge walls. Whatever made that sound had vocal cords, but they were bigger and stronger than anything human. Dave woke up at the sound, his eyes wide with terror. "It's calling," he whispered. "It knows we're here." Mike and I picked up the pace, half carrying Dave between us. The forest around us felt alive now, like we were being watched from every shadow. I kept my rifle ready, though I had no idea what good it would do against something that could snap 8-inch trees like twigs. We heard movement in the woods parallel to our path. Not random animal movement. Something big was keeping pace with us, staying just out of sight. Every time we stopped to rest, the sound stopped too. When we moved, it moved. We were being escorted, or maybe herded. By the time we reached my truck at the trailhead, full darkness had fallen, and snow was starting to come down steady. Dave was coherent enough to tell us that Tom and Mike Chen were still up there somewhere, but he couldn't remember what happened to them. "It took them to show them something," he said. "But I don't think they're coming back." I got Dave to the medical center in town, then called in a full search and rescue operation. But that night, alone in my cabin, I couldn't stop thinking about what we'd seen. In all my years tracking these mountains, I'd never encountered anything like those footprints, that shelter, or the intelligence behind the way we'd been watched and followed. My grandfather had been Cherokee on my mother's side, and he'd told me stories when I was little. Stories about the old guardians of the forest, beings that protected sacred places from those who would harm them. I'd always figured they were just tales meant to keep kids from wandering too far into dangerous country. But lying in bed that night, listening to snow hit my windows and remembering that unearthly howl echoing through the mountains, I started to wonder if maybe the old stories weren't stories at all. The next morning brought 6 inches of fresh snow and a search team of 12 experienced woodsmen. Sheriff's deputies, state police, volunteer search and rescue folks, all good people who knew these mountains. But as we headed back up toward Devil's Backbone, I had a bad feeling none of us were prepared for what we'd find. The tracks from yesterday were covered by snow, but I knew where we'd found the destroyed campsite. What we discovered there made yesterday's damage look like child's play. The entire clearing had been systematically destroyed. Trees were uprooted and arranged in precise patterns around the perimeter, like some kind of pattern, barrier, or warning. The shelter I'd found was gone, not destroyed, just gone, like it had been carefully dismantled and moved. But there were new tracks in the fresh snow, lots of them. The same huge, human-like footprints, but now there were dozens of trails crisscrossing the area. Whatever we were dealing with, it had been busy all night. "Looks like a whole family of bears," suggested Deputy Williams, though his voice didn't sound convinced. I knelt down next to the clearest set of prints. In the bright snow, details that had been hard to see in the dirt were obvious now. These weren't bear paws. They had 5 distinct toes, with what looked like opposable thumbs. The heel was broad and flat, like a human foot, but everything was scaled up to impossible size. "Bears don't have thumbs," I said quietly. We split into 3 teams to search for Tom Bradley and Mike Chen. Mike Sutherland came with me, along with Earl Whitaker, a local hunting guide who'd been working these mountains almost as long as my family had. Earl was in his 60s, tough as old leather, and scared of nothing I'd ever seen. We followed the heaviest concentration of tracks, leading deeper into the wilderness toward the Sacred Grove area where no hunting was supposed to happen. The Cherokee had always said that place was special, protected. My grandfather had shown it to me once when I was 12, made me promise never to hunt there or let others hunt there. The tracks led us through terrain that got rougher and steeper with every mile. These weren't game trails anymore. We were following paths that wound between massive boulders and through stands of trees so old they might have been here when the Cherokee first came to these mountains. About 2 miles in, Earl stopped dead and pointed ahead. "Boys, look at that." There, stretched between 2 massive oak trees, about 15 feet off the ground, hung what was left of Tom Bradley's backpack. It hadn't been dropped or lost. It had been deliberately placed there, like a warning sign. The pack was empty, and the metal frame was bent into impossible shapes. "How'd it get up there?" Mike asked. I was studying the trees on either side. The bark was scraped and gouged, but not by climbing gear. These marks looked like massive fingers had dug into the wood for handholds. Whatever put that pack there had climbed those trees with nothing but its bare hands. Earl was looking around nervously. "Jack, I've been hunting these woods for 40 years, and I ain't never seen sign like this. Whatever done this, it ain't natural." We pressed on, following the tracks deeper into country I'd rarely visited even as a ranger. The snow was getting heavier, and the forest around us felt wrong in ways I couldn't explain. The silence was too complete, like every animal for miles around had fled. That's when we found the second shelter. This one was bigger than the first, built into a natural cave in the ridge face. But it wasn't empty. As we approached, we could see bones scattered around the entrance. Lots of bones. Deer mostly, but some that looked disturbingly human-sized. "Jesus Christ," Mike whispered. Earl grabbed my arm. "Jack, we need to get out of here. This is something's home, and something big lives here." I was about to agree when we heard voices. Human voices, calling for help from somewhere deeper in the cave system. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, we entered the cave. Our flashlights showed a tunnel that went back further than our beams could reach. The voices were definitely human, Tom Bradley and Mike Chen, alive but trapped somewhere in the darkness ahead. The cave walls were smooth, worn by centuries of use. But carved into the stone were symbols, not random scratches, but deliberate markings that looked almost like writing. Cherokee symbols mixed with others I didn't recognize. "Help, please, somebody help us." The voices were clearer now, coming from a chamber deeper in the cave. We followed the tunnel for what felt like forever, though it was probably only a few hundred yards. The chamber we found opened up into a space as big as a church sanctuary, lit by some kind of natural phosphorescence in the rock walls. Tom and Mike Chen were there, alive but changed. They sat in the middle of the chamber, staring at something we couldn't see. When we called to them, they looked at us, but didn't seem to recognize who we were. "It's been teaching us," Tom said in a voice that didn't sound quite right. "Showing us how old this place is, how long it's been protecting the sacred grove." That's when I noticed the walls around us weren't natural rock. They were covered in paintings, ancient drawings that showed the history of these mountains, pictures of Cherokee hunters, colonial settlers, and towering figures that looked almost human but were twice the size of the men around them. And, in the newest paintings, near the chamber entrance, I could see modern hunters, men with rifles and bows, being watched by the same giant figures. Earl grabbed my shoulder. "Jack, we need to go, now." But before we could move, we heard it. The same howling roar we'd heard yesterday, but now it was coming from right behind us. We turned our lights toward the tunnel entrance and saw a shadow that filled the entire passage. Whatever was making that sound was between us and the only way out. Mike Sutherland raised his rifle, but I pushed the barrel down. "Don't," I said. "If we fight it in here, we all die." The shadow moved closer, and our lights finally showed us what we'd been tracking for 2 days. It was humanoid but massive, at least 9 feet tall and built like a linebacker, covered in dark hair that was almost black. Its face was a mixture of human and something else, with intelligent eyes that looked right into our souls. But it wasn't attacking. It was studying us, like it was trying to decide what to do with the intruders in its sacred place. "You brought them here," it said in a voice like rocks grinding together, "to the place where your grandfather made promises." I felt my knees go weak. It could talk. It knew about my grandfather. And somehow, it knew exactly who I was. The creature, I couldn't think of it as an animal anymore, stepped fully into the chamber. In the phosphorescent light, I could see details that made my mind reel. Its face was ancient but intelligent, with eyes that held knowledge spanning centuries. This wasn't some mindless beast. This was something that remembered things humans had forgotten. "Your grandfather came here when he was young," it said, its voice echoing off the stone walls. "He promised his family would protect the sacred grove. But now your people bring death machines to hunt where no hunting should happen." Tom and Mike Chen sat perfectly still, staring at the creature with expressions of awe and terror. They'd been here for days, listening to stories that went back generations. "I am the last guardian of this place," the creature continued. "My people protected these mountains when yours first came from across the great water. We made agreements with the Cherokee, promises written in stone and blood." Earl was shaking beside me, but his hunting instincts were still working. "Jack," he whispered, "look around the chamber. Those aren't just paintings, those are records. Treaties." He was right. The walls showed meetings between Cherokee leaders and towering figures like the one standing before us. Ceremonies, agreements, territorial boundaries marked in the ancient drawings. "But the Cherokee were forced to leave," the creature said sadly, "and the new people forgot the old promises. They bring weapons into sacred places. They take what was never meant to be taken." I found my voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "What are you?" "I am what your people call Sasquatch. My clan has protected these mountains for 1,000 years. But I am the last. The others have gone to the deep places, or crossed over to the spirit world. Only I remain to guard what must be guarded." Mike Sutherland was backing toward the tunnel, his rifle still in his hands. The creature's eyes followed him, and I saw something that terrified me more than its size or strength. I saw sadness, deep, ancient loneliness that came from being the last of your kind. "The hunters who come here now don't understand," it continued. "They see only animals to kill, trees to cut, land to own. They don't see the sacred grove where my ancestors are buried. They don't hear the old songs in the wind." "What do you want from us?" I asked. "I want the promises kept. I want the sacred places protected. I want to die in peace when my time comes, knowing that what I have guarded will remain safe." Tom Bradley spoke for the first time since we'd found him. "It's been showing us the history, Jack. This whole area, from here to the state line, it's all sacred ground, cemetery land, burial sites going back thousands of years." The creature nodded. "Your grandfather understood. He was Cherokee in his heart, even if his skin was pale. He promised his family would remember. But you have forgotten, Jackson Cumberland. You wear the uniform of those who would destroy what should be protected." I thought about my grandfather, about the stories he'd told me as a child. Stories I'd dismissed as folklore, legends meant to keep kids from getting lost in dangerous country. But now I realized they weren't stories at all. They were warnings, instructions, A sacred trust passed down through generations. What can I do? I asked. The creature studied me for a long moment. You can choose. You can be like your grandfather, a protector of the sacred places. Or you can be like the others, who see only resources to exploit. Mike Sutherland made his choice then. Panicking, he raised his rifle and fired point blank at the creature's chest. The bullet hit home but seemed to have no effect. The creature looked down at the small hole in its fur, then back at Mike with something like disappointment. "Iron cannot kill what the spirits protect," it said sadly. Then it moved. I'd never seen anything that big move so fast. One moment Mike was standing by the tunnel entrance. The next he was pressed against the cave wall by one massive hand. The creature could have crushed him like a bug, but instead it just held him there. "This is why the old agreements were made," the creature said. "Your people fear what they don't understand, and they try to kill what they fear. But some things are too important to be destroyed by fear." It released Mike, who collapsed to the ground gasping. "You will leave this place now. You will tell no one what you have seen here. And you, Jackson Cumberland, you will make a choice. Honor your grandfather's promise, or watch as I do what I must to protect the sacred grove." The threat was clear. If I couldn't find a way to keep hunters and developers away from this area, the creature would do it by force. And given what I'd seen of its strength and intelligence, that would mean a lot of dead people. "How?" I asked. "How do I protect a place this big? I'm just one ranger." The creature smiled then, and despite its fearsome appearance, there was kindness in that expression. "The same way your grandfather did. By remembering that some places are too sacred to be owned, too important to be sold, too powerful to be destroyed by those who don't understand their value." It reached into a crevice in the cave wall and pulled out something wrapped in old leather. When it unfolded the bundle, I saw tobacco and sage, along with a piece of paper covered in my grandfather's handwriting. "He left this for you," the creature said. "Instructions for the ceremony that renews the old promises. Your blood carries the obligation, Jackson Cumberland. Will you honor it?" I took the bundle with shaking hands. My grandfather's note was simple. "For my grandson, when the guardian returns, the sacred grove must be protected, by law if possible, by older laws if necessary." Looking around at the cave paintings, at Tom and Mike Chen, who'd been changed by what they'd seen, at the ancient creature who'd outlived civilizations, I realized I'd been preparing for this moment my whole life without knowing it. "Yes," I said, "I'll honor the promise." The ceremony my grandfather had written about was simpler than I expected, but more powerful than anything I'd ever experienced. Standing in the sacred grove with the creature watching, I offered tobacco to the four directions and spoke the Cherokee words my grandfather had taught me as a child. Words I'd never really understood until that moment. The effect was immediate. The silence that had filled these woods for days was broken by the return of normal forest sounds. Birds called from the trees, squirrels chattered, and somewhere in the distance I could hear a stream flowing that I'd never noticed before. "It is done," the creature said. "The old agreement is renewed. This place will be protected." Tom and Mike Chen remembered nothing of their time in the cave, though both men quit hunting permanently after that day. They told everyone they'd gotten lost in a storm and found shelter, but something about the experience had changed them. They became advocates for wilderness protection, though they could never quite explain why. Mike Sutherland transferred to a different district a month later. He never talked about what happened in that cave, but he requested assignment to areas with no wilderness designation, places where the only things to worry about were normal predators and lost hikers. As for me, I had work to do. Using channels I'd never navigated before, I began pushing for protected status for the entire Devil's Backbone wilderness area. It took 3 years of bureaucratic battles, environmental impact studies, and political maneuvering, but eventually the designation went through. 30 square miles of sacred grove and surrounding forest became off-limits to hunting, logging, and development. The official reason was habitat protection for endangered species. The real reason was an agreement older than written law, renewed by blood and honored by oath. I still work these mountains, but my job has changed. Instead of just search and rescue, I've become a guardian of the sacred places scattered throughout the Virginia wilderness. There are more of them than most people realize. groves and caves and hidden valleys where the old spirits still dwell, places that need protection from a world that's forgotten how to see the sacred in the natural. The creature and I have an understanding now. I keep hunters and developers away from the protected areas, and it keeps itself hidden from those who wouldn't understand. Sometimes, on quiet nights when I'm doing backcountry patrol, I'll see a shadow moving through the trees at the edge of my vision. A reminder that some guardians never rest, and some promises must be kept forever. The Cherokee were forced from these mountains more than a century ago, but their agreements with the ancient protectors remain in force. I've learned that there are networks of people, some Cherokee descendants who never left, some like me who carry the obligation through mixed blood, some who've simply been chosen to remember what others have forgotten. We watch over the sacred places. We keep the old promises. And we make sure that in a world obsessed with development and profit, there are still wild spaces where ancient guardians can walk in peace. The Devil's Backbone incident was officially closed as a search and rescue operation with successful recovery of all missing persons. No mention was made of destroyed campsites, impossible tracks, or cave paintings that shouldn't exist. Sometimes the most important truths are the ones that never appear in official reports. But if you're ever hunting in Virginia's wilderness and you find trees stripped of bark 12 feet off the ground, or you discover footprints too big to belong to any known animal, or you hear voices in the wind speaking words in languages you don't recognize, remember this story. Some territories have guardians older than human memory, and some promises are more binding than any written law. The mountains remember what we've forgotten, and they're still watching, still protecting, still honoring agreements made in the days when humans knew how to speak with the spirits of the wild places. That knowledge isn't lost forever. It's just waiting for people wise enough to listen and brave enough to accept the responsibility that comes with understanding the truth about what really dwells in the deep woods. My name is Elizabeth Mountaineer, but everyone calls me Libby. I've been a park ranger at Seneca Rocks for 12 years now, and in that time, I've pulled 67 climbers off those stone towers, some scared, some broken, all grateful to be alive. My family's been in these West Virginia mountains for 3 generations. We know these rocks like we know our own heartbeat. I'm going to tell you about something that happened in April 1984. Something that changed everything I thought I knew about climbing, about safety, about what's really out there on those ancient stone faces. But first, you need to understand what Seneca Rocks means to climbers. Picture 2 massive fins of sandstone shooting 900 feet straight up from the forest floor. Gray stone carved by wind and water over millions of years, with cracks just wide enough for your fingers and toes. It's one of the best climbing spots on the East Coast. People come from everywhere to test themselves against those vertical walls. I started climbing when I was 8 years old. My dad would take me up the easy routes, teaching me to read the rock, to feel where it was solid and where it might crumble. By the time I was 16, I could climb routes that scared grown men. By 20, I was guiding professionally. I loved everything about it, the focus it demanded, the way your whole world narrowed down to the next handhold, the trust you had to place in your partner and your gear. Then, I lost someone. His name was Marcus Webb. We'd been climbing partners for 5 years. He was careful, skilled, better than me in a lot of ways. We were on a route called the South Peak Direct, on a clear September morning. I was leading, he was belaying me from below. I made it to a ledge about 200 feet up and set up an anchor point to bring him up. I never saw what happened. I heard him yell just one short sound and then his weight disappeared from the rope. When I rappelled down, I found to him at the base. The rope was still clipped to his harness. His anchor had been solid. There was no reason for the fall. No explanation that made sense. The official report said, equipment failure. But I'd checked every piece of his gear that morning. I still check it in my nightmares. After Marcus died, I stopped guiding. I couldn't do it anymore. But I couldn't leave the rocks either. Being a ranger seemed like the right compromise. I could stay close to climbing, help keep people safe, maybe prevent what happened to Marcus from happening to someone else. So that's who I was in April 1984. 35 years old, living alone in a small cabin near the park boundary, spending my days doing safety inspections and teaching climbing clinics. I knew every route on Seneca Rocks, every crack, every loose hold, every place where the stone got crumbly, I kept detailed records of every accident, every close call, looking for patterns that might save lives. I thought I had everything figured out. I thought the only dangers on those rocks were the ones you could see and measure and prepare for. The morning it started, I was doing a routine inspection of the popular routes. Spring climbing season had just begun, and we'd had a wet winter. Sometimes water gets into cracks and freezes, making the rock unstable. It was my job to check for that kind of thing. The fog was just burning off when I hiked to the base. I remember thinking how quiet it was. Usually in spring, the woods are full of birds singing, but that morning everything felt hushed. Still, like the forest was holding its breath. I didn't think much of it at the time. I started climbing a route called Old Man's Route, an easy climb I'd done hundreds of times. Good warm-up, nice view from the top. The stone felt solid under my hands, dry and rough. About halfway up, maybe 300 feet off the ground, I stopped to rest on a ledge. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was wind moving through the rock formations. Seneca Rocks is famous for that. The way air flows through all those cracks and gaps can create strange sounds. Whistles, moans, sometimes almost like words, if you let your imagination run wild. But there was no wind that morning. The air was perfectly still. The sound came again, low and resonant, like someone humming deep in their chest. It seemed to come from inside the rock itself, vibrating up through the stone into my hands and feet. I pressed my ear against the rock face. The humming got louder, and underneath it, I could swear I heard voices, multiple voices, chanting in some language I didn't recognize. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed off the stone and died in the quiet forest. The humming stopped. I waited there on that ledge for 5 full minutes, listening. Nothing. Just my own breathing and the creak of my climbing harness. I shook my head, feeling foolish. 12 years of climbing these rocks, and I was getting spooked by acoustics. I finished the climb and rappelled down. Made my notes, everything looked safe. No loose rock, no ice damage. A perfect day for climbing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me up there. That those voices, whatever they were, had gone quiet because they knew I was listening. 3 days later, a couple from Ohio came into the ranger station looking shaken up. "Something weird happened on our climb this morning," the woman said. Her name was Jennifer, and her hands were still trembling as she held her coffee cup. "We were on the ecstasy route, maybe 200 feet up, and we heard. I don't know how to describe it. Singing?" Her husband, Tom, nodded. "Not like regular singing. It was coming from everywhere at once, like the rock itself was making music." I felt my stomach tighten. "What did you do?" "We came down," Tom said. "Fast. Look, we've been climbing for 10 years. We know wind can make weird sounds in rock formations. But this wasn't wind. This was..." He trailed off, looking embarrassed. "This was what?" I asked gently. Jennifer and Tom exchanged a glance. "It sounded like it was calling our names," Jennifer said quietly. "Both of us, clear as day. Jennifer, Tom, over and over. I wrote up their report, assured them that I'd inspect the route, and watched them drive away. They didn't say they'd never come back to Seneca Rocks, but I could see it in their eyes. They wouldn't. That afternoon, I climbed the ecstasy route myself, brought an audio recorder with me, which wasn't standard equipment, but I figured it couldn't hurt. The climb was uneventful until I reached the spot where Jennifer and Tom said they'd heard the voices. I stopped, waited, listened. For a long time, there was nothing. Then, so faint I almost missed it humming. That same deep, resonant sound I'd heard 3 days earlier. I pulled out the audio recorder and hit record. The humming grew louder, not gradually, but in sudden jumps, like someone was turning up a volume dial. And then I heard it. My name, Libby. Just once, clear and unmistakable. A man's voice echoing from somewhere inside the rock. It sounded like Marcus. My hands went numb. The recorder slipped from my fingers and bounced once before falling, spinning down through space to shatter on the rocks below. "Marcus?" I whispered. The humming stopped. The silence that followed was so complete it hurt my ears. I pressed against the rock face, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. "Marcus, is that you?" Nothing. just stone and sky and the smell of old sandstone. I don't remember the climb down. I must have done it safely because I'm here telling you this story, but I couldn't tell you a single detail about it. My mind was somewhere else entirely. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing that voice. Marcus's voice, impossible as that was. Marcus was dead. I'd been to his funeral. I'd watched them put him in the ground, but I'd also heard him call my name from inside solid rock. The next morning, I was back in the office early when my radio crackled. It was Tom Blackwater, another ranger I'd worked with for years. Tom was Seneca Nation, second generation in these mountains after his family had moved back from Oklahoma. He knew more about the history of these rocks than anyone else I'd ever met. "Libby, you need to get up to the north face," Tom's voice said through the static. "We've got a situation." I grabbed my gear and drove up the access road as far as it went, then hiked the last mile to where Tom was waiting. He was standing with 3 climbers, a group from Pennsylvania who looked scared and angry in equal measure. "Tell her what you told me," Tom said. The lead climber, a guy named Derek Castellano, stepped forward. He was in his 40s, fit and serious looking. The kind of climber who'd done this enough times to know what was normal and what wasn't. "We were attempting the Marshall-Myers route," Derek said. "Got about 400 feet up when my cam failed." A cam is a piece of protection, a mechanical device you wedge into cracks to catch you if you fall. They're incredibly reliable. I'd never seen one fail if it was placed correctly. "Can I see it?" I asked. Derek handed it over. I examined it carefully. The metal was fine, no cracks or bends. The springs worked perfectly. There was absolutely nothing wrong with it. "It was placed correctly?" I asked. "Perfect placement," Derek said. "I've been climbing for 20 years. I know how to set protection. But when I weighted it, it just popped out. Not the kind of pop out you get from a bad placement. It was like the rock pushed it out." "Rocks don't push," I said automatically. "I know that," Derek snapped. "I know how this sounds, but that's what happened. And that's not even the weird part." He looked at his 2 partners. They both nodded, encouraging him to continue. Right before the cam failed, we all heard it. A voice coming from the rock. It said, "Danger, go down, danger," over and over. My skin went cold. What did the voice sound like? "Old," one of the other climbers said, "and sad, like someone warning us about something terrible." Tom and I exchanged looks. I could see my own worry reflected in his dark eyes. "I need to inspect that route," I said. "I'll come with you," Tom said. Derek and his partners headed down to the parking area while Tom and I geared up. As we checked our equipment, Tom said quietly, "My grandfather told me stories about these rocks. Said they were sacred to our people. Vision quest sites. Places where young warriors would come to seek guidance from the spirits." "Tom, I know how it sounds," he said, cutting me off. "But I also know what I've been hearing lately. Reports coming in from other rangers. Strange sounds. Equipment failures. 3 accidents in the past week on routes that should be safe." 3? I hadn't heard about that. 2 broken ankles and a dislocated shoulder, all experienced climbers. All of them said the same thing right before the accident. They heard voices telling them to go back. We started up the Marshall-Myers route. It's a challenging climb, but nothing I hadn't done before. The morning sun warmed the rock face, and for the first time in days, I started to relax. This was what I knew: stone and rope, and the simple physics of staying attached to a vertical wall. We were about 300 feet up when I reached for a handhold, and the rock crumbled under my fingers. I dropped 6 inches before my last piece of protection caught me. My heart jumped into my throat. "You okay?" Tom called from below. "Yeah." "Old broke." I examined what was left of it. The stone had simply disintegrated, like it had been eaten away from the inside. But that didn't make sense. I'd inspected this route 2 months ago, and this section had been solid. I reached for another hold, testing it carefully before putting my weight on it. It felt stable. I pulled up, moved my feet higher, reached for the next hold. That's when the humming started. Not faint this time, loud and all around us, like we were inside a giant bell that had just been struck. The rock vibrated under my hands. I could feel it in my bones and my teeth. "Tom," I shouted, "you hear that?" "Yeah," he sounded scared. and Tom never sounded scared. The humming rose in pitch and volume, and then came the voices. Multiple voices, chanting in a language I didn't know. The words rolled and echoed off the stone, surrounding us completely. And then, cutting through the chanting, clear as day. "Libby, Marcus fell here. Marcus died here. Will you die here too?" I looked down. We were directly above the spot where I'd found Marcus's body 3 years ago. My vision swam. The rock seemed to pulse under my hands, breathing like something alive. The voices grew louder, more insistent, and I realized with sudden clarity that they weren't threatening me. They were warning me. "Tom, we need to go down," I said. "Right now." We descended as quickly as we safely could. About halfway down, I heard a sound like thunder. I looked up just in time to see a section of rock, the exact section I'd been climbing through minutes before, peel away from the face and crash down past us. If we'd still been up there, we'd be dead. We made it to the ground and sat there, breathing hard, watching dust settle from the rockfall above. "That rock was solid this morning," I said. "I checked it." "I know," Tom said. "So what just happened?" Tom was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "I think my grandfather's stories might not be stories." That night, I called a meeting with the other rangers and climbing safety specialists. 7 of us gathered in the main office after dark. I'd asked Tom to bring his grandfather, a man named Joseph Blackwater, who had to be close to 90 years old but still had eyes as sharp as a hawk's. I laid out everything we knew: the voices, the equipment failures, the sudden rockfalls on routes that should be stable, the accidents that kept happening to experienced climbers who never should have fallen. Maria Santos, our climbing safety specialist, had been keeping records. She spread them out on the table. 14 incidents in the past 2 weeks, she said. All on routes that passed safety inspections, all involving experienced climbers, and all of them reported hearing voices right before the incident. "This is insane," said Jim Wheeler, the oldest ranger among us. "Rocks don't talk. This has to be some kind of mass hysteria, or maybe gas leaking from underground." "No gas," Maria interrupted. "I checked. Air quality is normal." "Then what?" Jim demanded. "You're telling me ghosts are causing climbing accidents?" Everyone looked uncomfortable. No one wanted to say it out loud. Joseph Blackwater spoke for the first time. His voice was soft but carried weight. "These rocks have been sacred to my people for longer than your history books, remember. Young warriors would come here to fast and pray, seeking visions that would guide their lives. The spirits of those who died in their quest still guard this place." "Mr. Blackwater, with all respect," Jim started. "Let him finish," I said. Joseph nodded at me. "The spirits protect the rocks. They do not want them destroyed. But they also protect the climbers. If the climbers show respect, they warn of danger. They push away those who should not be here. They speak the names of the dead as a reminder that these heights are not playground. They are sacred ground." "So what do we do?" Tom asked his grandfather. "You listen," Joseph said simply. "When the spirits warn you, you go down. When they sing, you pay attention. When they call the names of the dead, you remember that death is always close on the mountain." The meeting broke up without any real decisions being made. Half the rangers thought we were losing our minds. The other half didn't know what to think. I fell somewhere in the middle. I knew what I'd heard and seen, but believing it meant accepting that the world worked very differently than I'd always thought. 3 days later, Derek Castellano went missing. He'd come back to Seneca Rocks alone, determined to complete the Marshall Myers route. He'd checked in at the ranger station at dawn, filed his climbing plan, and headed up. He was supposed to be back by 2 in the afternoon. When he didn't return by 4, we started searching. Tom and I were the first ones up the route. We found his gear at a belay station about 500 feet up: rope, cams, carabiners, all arranged neatly on the ledge. His chalk bag was there too, sitting upright like he'd carefully placed it. "But no, Derek. This doesn't make sense," Tom said. "Why would he leave his gear?" I looked at the rock face above us. The route continued up another 400 feet to the summit. Maybe he's up there. Maybe he ran into trouble and abandoned his equipment. But even as I said it, I knew it was wrong. No climber, no matter how experienced or crazy, would leave their rope and protection behind. It was suicide. We continued up, free climbing now without the safety of a rope. The rock felt strange under my hands, warm, almost hot, though the sun had already dipped behind the ridge. That humming started again, so low I felt it more than heard it. "Derek," I shouted. "Derek Castellano!" My voice echoed back to me, mocking. We reached the summit as the sun was setting. No Derek, no signs of him at all. On the way down the long way, hiking around on, with the trail rather than rappelling in the dark, we found something that made my blood run cold. Carved into a flat section of rock, too high for anyone to reach without climbing gear, were fresh petroglyphs. Stick figures of men climbing, and around them, swirling patterns that might have been wind or might have been spirits. And in the center, newly carved so the stone still showed white, a figure falling. Tom pulled out his phone and took pictures. As soon as the flash went off, the figures seemed to move in my peripheral vision. I blinked, looked again. They were just carved lines in stone, but I could swear they'd been different a moment before. We searched for Derek for 3 more days. Dogs, helicopters, teams of climbers checking every route and ledge. Nothing. It was like he'd simply vanished into the rock. On the 4th day, I went back up alone. I didn't tell anyone. I knew they'd try to stop me, and I knew I had to do this. I was the senior ranger. These were my rocks. If something was happening here, if there was any way to find Derek or prevent more accidents, I had to try. I started climbing the Marshall Myers route in the pre-dawn darkness, my headlamp cutting a small circle of light in the vast blackness of the rock face. I moved carefully, testing every hold, placing my protection with extra care. The humming started when I was about 200 feet up. "I'm listening," I said out loud. "I'm trying to understand. Please help me." The humming grew louder. I kept climbing. As the sun rose behind me, painting the rocks gold and red, I heard the voices start their chanting. The language was old, rhythmic, rising and falling like waves. At 300 feet, I found the first offering. It was a small bundle of sage and sweetgrass, tied with sinew, sitting on a ledge that would be almost impossible to reach without climbing gear. The bundle was fresh. I could still smell the herbs. I kept climbing. At 400 feet, another offering. This one included a small stone carved with symbols I didn't recognize. At 500 feet, where Derek's gear had been found, I stopped. The belay station was empty now we'd collected all his equipment for the investigation. But on the rock face itself, I saw something new. More petroglyphs. These ones showed a climber reaching the summit, arms raised in triumph. Around him, spirit figures I couldn't think of them as anything else seemed to be celebrating with him. "Where is he?" I asked the empty air. "Where's Derek?" The chanting stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, I heard a single word, spoken so clearly it might have come from someone standing right next to me. "Above." I looked up. The final 400 feet to the summit stretched above me, vertical and forbidding in the morning light. Without Derek's rope, I'd be free climbing. One mistake, one loose hold, and I'd fall 500 feet to the rocks below, just like Marcus had fallen. "Is he alive?" I asked. The wind picked up, warm and strange, carrying that humming sound. And in the hum, I heard what might have been a yes. I started climbing again. The rock seemed to help me. I know how that sounds, but it's true. Holds appeared where I needed them. Small ledges just big enough for my feet, cracks that accepted my fingers perfectly. The stone felt warm and solid, almost welcoming. The voices sang louder as I climbed higher, no longer chanting but making sounds that rose and fell in harmonies that shouldn't be possible from human throats. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. At 700 feet, with only 200 more to go, I felt my strength starting to fade. My arms shook, my legs trembled. I'd been climbing for hours without rest. "I can't," I gasped. "I can't make it." The singing changed, became softer, more gentle, almost like a lullaby. And then I felt it hands on my back, pressing me against the rock, not pushing me off, but supporting me, helping me rest. The pressure was firm and real and impossible. "Thank you," I whispered. The pressure eased. I took a deep breath and kept climbing. The summit came slowly, almost anticlimactically. One moment I was clinging to vertical stone. The next I was pulling myself over the edge onto flat rock. Derek was there. He was sitting cross-legged on the highest point of the summit, facing east toward the rising sun. His eyes were closed. For a terrible moment, I thought he was dead. Then he opened his eyes and looked at me. "Hello, Libby," he said calmly. "I've been waiting for you." Derek's face was sunburned, his lips cracked. He'd been up here for 4 days with no water, no food, no protection from the elements. He should have been dying. Instead, he looked peaceful. "Derek, what happened?" I knelt beside him, already reaching for my radio to call for rescue. He put his hand on mine, stopping me. "Wait," he said. "You need to understand first. They brought me here for a reason." "Who brought you here?" "The Guardians." He said it like it was the most natural thing in the world. The spirits of the Seneca warriors who died seeking their visions on these rocks. They've been protecting this place for centuries. I sat down hard. My legs wouldn't hold me anymore. "You've been talking to them?" "Not talking. Listening." Derek looked out at the forest spreading below us. "When I was climbing, I heard them warning me. But I was arrogant. I thought I knew better. I kept pushing up, ignoring the signs, ignoring the voices, and then..." He paused, his expression distant. "Then what?" "I fell. A hold broke, my protection failed, and I fell. I remember the sensation of dropping, the air rushing past me. I should have died, but they caught me." "The spirits caught you?" "The rock itself caught me." Derek held up his hands. They were scraped and bruised but not broken. The stone became soft, like clay. It absorbed the impact. And then the voices told me to climb. So I climbed. No gear, no rope, just my hands and feet and their guidance. They showed me holds I never would have seen. They warned me away from loose sections. They brought me here to the top and told me to wait. Wait for what? For you. Derek finally looked at me. "You lost someone on these rocks. Marcus, right?" The spirits knew that. They knew you'd come looking for me. They wanted you to understand. Understand what? That these rocks are alive. Not alive like we're alive, but conscious. Connected to the spirits of everyone who's died here, everyone who's prayed here, everyone who's sought visions here. The Seneca knew this. That's why this was a sacred place for them. My radio crackled. Tom's voice came through. "Libby, you up there? We saw your truck." I pulled out the radio. "I'm on the summit. I found Derek. He's alive." A pause. Then Tom's voice again, filled with relief. "Thank God. Is he hurt?" "No. But Tom, I need you to bring your grandfather up here, and some water. And..." I looked at Derek. "And an open mind." It took 3 hours for Tom and Joseph to reach the summit. I spent that time listening to Derek describe his 4 days. With the spirits, the visions they'd shown him, the stories they'd told, the warnings they'd given about climbers who treated these rocks as nothing more than a challenge to be conquered. "They're not trying to hurt anyone," Derek said. "They're trying to protect. Both the rocks and the climbers." But people stopped listening. They stopped showing respect, so the spirits have had to be more. When Joseph Blackwater finally pulled himself over the summit edge, he didn't look surprised to see us. He walked straight to Derek and studied his face for a long moment. "You've been on a vision quest," Joseph said. It wasn't a question. Derek nodded. "I didn't mean to. But yes." Joseph turned to me. "And you climbed here without rope or protection?" "The rock helped me," I said. It sounded crazy, but it was true. Joseph smiled the first time I'd seen him smile. "The spirits have accepted you, both of you. They've shown you the old ways." "What do we do now?" I asked. Joseph pulled out a bundle of sage and sweetgrass, like the offerings I'd seen on the way up. He lit it, letting smoke curl up into the clear air. He began speaking in Seneca, words that rolled and flowed like water over stones. As he spoke, the rock beneath us began to hum. That same deep resonance I'd been hearing for weeks, but stronger now, more purposeful. The sound built and built until it felt like the whole mountain was singing. And then, for just a moment, I saw them. Figures made of stone and light, standing around us in a circle. Young men with faces painted for war, older men with weathered features, all watching us with eyes that had seen centuries pass. I recognized some of those faces. I'd seen them in old photographs at the Seneca Nation Museum. Warriors and chiefs and holy men, all connected to this place, all still protecting it. One of them stepped forward. He looked at me, and I knew with absolute certainty that he'd been there the day Marcus fell. He'd tried to warn us. We just hadn't been listening. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry I didn't understand." The warrior nodded once. Then he reached out with a hand that looked solid as stone and touched my forehead. Everything went white. When my vision cleared, I was lying on my back, staring up at the sky. Tom was kneeling beside me, looking worried. Joseph was still standing, speaking his prayers. Derek sat nearby, that same peaceful expression on his face. "What happened?" Tom asked. "I saw them," I said. "All of them. The guardians." Joseph finished his prayer and tucked the sage bundle away. "They've given you a gift, Ranger. Libby. You can hear them now. Truly hear them. It's a responsibility." I sat up slowly. My body ached from the climb, but something felt different. The rock beneath me still hummed, but now I could understand it. Not words exactly, but feelings. Intentions. The spirits wanted peace. They wanted respect. They wanted climbers to be safe. "I'll make sure people listen," I promised. "No more accidents. No more deaths." The humming gentled, almost like approval. We helped Derek down. He was dehydrated and exhausted, but otherwise fine. Impossible, but fine. The descent took hours, and we had to stop frequently to let him rest. But the whole way down, I felt the spirits guiding us, showing us the safest route, warming the stone where we needed to grip it. At the base, an ambulance was waiting for Derek. The medics couldn't believe he'd survived 4 days on the summit. They called it a miracle. I called it something else. The official report said Derek had gotten a miracle, disoriented, and climbed to the summit, where mild hypothermia had caused him to become confused. My report said I'd climbed up to find him, and we'd both made it down safely with Tom and Joseph's help. Both reports were true, as far as they went. They just left out the important parts. But things changed at Seneca Rocks after that. Tom and I, with Joseph's guidance, established new protocols. Before the climbing season started each year, we held a ceremony at the base of the rocks. Joseph or other Seneca elders would offer tobacco and sage, speaking prayers of respect to the spirits. Climbers weren't required to participate, but we encouraged it. Most of them did, once they heard the stories. We also installed small plaques at the base of popular routes, explaining the sacred history of the rocks. Not asking people to believe in spirits, just asking them to climb with respect, to pay attention to the mountain, to listen when something felt wrong. The accidents dropped dramatically. Not to zero, rock climbing is dangerous, and sometimes people get hurt. But the strange failures stopped. The voices continued, but now climbers knew to pay attention to them instead of ignoring them. Derek Castellano comes back every year. He's become one of our best climbing instructors, teaching people not just technique but awareness. Respect. How to read the mountain's mood. How to know when to push forward and when to retreat. As for me, I can still hear them. Every time I'm on those rocks, I feel the presence of the guardians. Sometimes they hum, sometimes they sing, sometimes they whisper warnings or encouragement. I've learned to trust them completely. Last month, I was climbing with a group of beginners on an easy route. About halfway up, I felt the stone grow warm under my hand. A voice soft and sad whispered a name I knew. Marcus. I looked at the rock face. For just a second, I saw him there, my old climbing partner, smiling at me the way he used to before a climb. "I miss you," I told him. The warmth under my hand pulsed once, like a heartbeat, then faded. I think he's one of the guardians now. I think maybe that's why I didn't die in that fall years ago. He was learning to be a protector even then. Learning to warn the living away from danger. I've been a ranger at Seneca Rocks for 15 years now. I've pulled 83 climbers off those stone towers, and I plan to pull many more. But I don't do it alone anymore. The spirits help. The rock helps. The ancient guardians who died seeking visions on these sacred heights, they help too. All they ever wanted was for us to listen. So, if you come to Seneca Rocks to climb, do me a favor. Before you start up, put your hand on the stone. Feel it. Really feel it. And if you hear humming or singing or voices calling from impossible places, don't ignore them. They're trying to keep you safe. The mountains, remember climbers older than Felv, recorded history. They remember every person who's ever touched their stone faces, everyone who's fallen, everyone who's made it to the top. They remember and they protect. You just have to show respect. And always, always listen when the rocks sing. My name is Samuel Ridgway, but everyone calls me Sam. I've been a park ranger for 19 years, and I know these mountains like the back of my hand. Born and raised here in North Carolina, with Cherokee blood from my grandmother's side and Scottish from my grandfather's, the Blue Ridge Mountains are in my bones. I specialize in high-elevation ecosystems, icy age, the weird, wonderful places where ice age plants still grow and the air gets so thin it makes flatlanders dizzy. Craggy Dome is my beat, all 6,085 feet of it. Most folks know it for the rhododendron gardens that bloom pink and purple every June, but I know every rare plant, every hidden trail, every secret the mountain keeps. Or at least I thought I did. My wife Sarah is a botanist, so our dinner conversations tend to revolve around Latin plant names and soil pH levels. She always teased me about being too scientific, too practical. "Sam," she'd say, "your Cherokee grandmother would roll over in her grave if she knew how much you ignore the old stories." She was right. I'd dismissed all that mountain folklore as superstition. Plants don't have spirits. Mountains don't watch you. Everything has a scientific explanation if you look hard enough. That was before June 1986, when the rhododendrons started moving. The first sign something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning when I was doing my weekly plant survey. I'd been documenting the same rare species in the same locations for 5 years running. Gray's lily, mountain oatgrass, the tiny bluets that only grow on Craggy's summit, NDO. I knew exactly where every single one lived. Except that morning, they weren't where they were supposed to be. I found a patch of Gray's lilies that should have been near the main trail, but they were 50 yards deeper into the forest. Not seed dispersal. These were mature plants with established root systems. You don't just dig up lilies and replant them overnight. It takes years for them to recover from transplanting. I marked it in my notebook as an error. Maybe I'd misremembered the location. 19 years in the mountains, and I was starting to make rookie mistakes. The radio crackled to life as I was checking another survey point. "Sam, you there?" It was dispatch. "Here, Martha. Got a call from some botanist up your way. Says she's documenting some unusual plant behavior. You seen anything weird?" I looked at my notebook where I'd written location error next to 3 different species entries. Define weird. She said the flowers are moving. Wanted me to send someone to check on her. Her name's Dr. Jane Morrison, supposed to be some hotshot from the university. Dr. Morrison. I'd heard of her. Published papers on plant communication, chemical signals between trees. Smart woman, but the kind of scientist who saw patterns everywhere. "I'll find her," I said. Probably just seeing things in the fog. The fog was thick that morning, rolling up from the valleys in gray waves. It made the rhododendron gardens look like something from a dream, all pink blossoms floating in white mist. Beautiful, but it could play tricks on your eyes. I found Dr. Morrison about an hour later, crouched next to a massive rhododendron bush with a notebook full of sketches. She was maybe 40, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and dirt under her fingernails. The kind of scientist who wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. "Ranger Ridgway?" She stood up, brushing leaves off her knees. "Thank you for coming. I know this sounds crazy, but I need you to witness something." She pointed to the rhododendron bush. "I've been watching this plant for 3 hours. It's been slowly turning to face me. Not just the flowers following the sun. I halt. The entire bush is rotating." I looked at the bush. It was about 8 feet tall, covered in pink blooms, perfectly normal except for one thing. There was a clear circle of disturbed earth around its base, like something had been dragged in a slow circle. "Plants don't move," I said automatically. "I know that. I've been studying plants for 15 years. But look at my sketches." She flipped through her notebook, showing me drawings of the same bush from different angles. The timestamp showed a clear progression, the bush slowly rotating over 3 hours. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. There has to be an explanation. I'm sure there is, but I can't think of one. She looked up at me with worried eyes. And there's something else. The rhododendrons are blooming in patterns. She led me deeper into the garden, pointing out arrangements of flowers that formed distinct shapes. Circles, triangles, even what looked like Cherokee symbols my grandmother had shown me as a kid. "Plants bloom randomly," I said, but my voice sounded uncertain even to me. That's what I thought too. Dr. Morrison's voice was quiet. But this isn't random, this is communication. The fog swirled around us, and for just a moment, I could have sworn I saw the flowers turn toward our voices, like faces following a conversation. I shook my head. 19 years in these mountains, and I was letting some university scientists spook me with plant stories. But as we walked back to the main trail, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The path we'd taken into the garden was gone. Where there should have been an opening between the rhododendron bushes, there was now a solid wall of green leaves and pink flowers. "Did we take a wrong turn?" Dr. Morrison asked. I pulled out my compass, then my topographic map. According to both, we were standing exactly where the trail should be. But the trail had vanished, replaced by rhododendrons that looked like they'd been growing there for decades. "Stay close," I told her, and started looking for another way out. That's when I heard it. A sound like wind, through leaves. Except there was no wind. It came from all around us, from the rhododendrons themselves, and it sounded almost like whispering. It took us 20 minutes to find our way out of the rhododendron garden, following what seemed like a completely different path than the one we'd used to enter. When we finally reached the main trail, I was sweating despite the cool mountain air. "That was disorienting," Dr. Morrison said, but I could see the worry in her eyes. She was thinking the same thing I was. Trails don't just disappear. I radioed back to headquarters. "Martha, I'm with Dr. Morrison. We had some navigation issues in the rhododendron garden. Trails seem to be unclear." "Copy that. Weather Service says fog might get thicker this afternoon. You two be careful up there." I clipped the radio back to my belt. Fog. That had to be it. The fog was making everything look different, confusing familiar landmarks. It happened to even experienced hikers. "I'd like to set up a monitoring station, Doctor," Morrison said. "Time-lapse cameras, motion sensors. If plants are really moving, I need to document it properly." I nodded, though part of me hoped the cameras would show nothing unusual. Normal plants behaving normally, and we could all go home and forget about mysterious moving bushes. We spent the next 2 hours setting up equipment at 3 different locations in the garden. Dr. Morrison was thorough, checking angles and battery levels twice. Her cameras were the expensive kind, the type that could catch a deer blinking at 50 yards. "If anything moves, we'll know about it," she said. By afternoon, the fog had gotten so thick we could barely see 10 feet ahead. Mountain weather, it could change in minutes up here. I suggested we head down to safer ground, but Dr. Morrison wanted to check her cameras one more time. That's when we found William. William Sequoia was a Cherokee botanist I'd worked with before. Good, man, knew the traditional uses for every plant on the mountain. He was standing perfectly still in a clearing, staring at something we couldn't see through the fog. "William?" I called. "You okay?" He didn't turn around, didn't even seem to hear me. I walked closer and saw he was looking at a rhododendron bush. The same one Dr. Morrison had been watching that morning. Except now it was covered in flowers arranged in a perfect spiral pattern. Not a random spiral, a deliberate one, like someone had carefully positioned each bloom. "How long have you been standing here?" I asked. William finally looked at me, and his eyes were wide. "The plants?" he said quietly. "They're talking to each other." "Doctor?" Morrison pulled out some kind of electronic device. "Chemical sensors," she explained. "They detect pheromones and other plant communication signals." The device started beeping immediately. Not the slow, steady beep of normal background readings. This was rapid, urgent, like a Geiger counter near radiation. "That's impossible, Doctor," Morrison whispered, staring at the display. "The chemical activity levels are off the charts. It's like every plant in this area is screaming." I looked around the garden with new eyes. The fog made everything look ghostly, but now I noticed things I'd missed before. The rhododendrons weren't just randomly scattered. They formed clear patterns, pathways, almost like rooms in a house. "We need to get out of here," William said suddenly. "My grandmother told me stories about this place, about plants that protect themselves." "Protect themselves from what?" I asked. Before he could answer, Dr. Morrison's radio crackled to life. Not her radio, one of the small units she'd set up with her cameras. The voice coming through was garbled, distant, but we could make out words. Moving, all moving. "They're everywhere." "That's Dr. Chen," she said, pulling out a larger radio. My research partner, he's at monitoring station 2. She tried calling him back, but got only static. The fog seemed to be getting thicker, pressing in around us like a living thing. Which way is station 2? I asked. Dr. Morrison looked around, confused. It should be that direction, I think. But when we looked where she was pointing, there was no trail. Just a solid wall of rhododendrons, their pink flowers gleaming wetly in the fog. The trails keep changing, William said quietly, just like the old stories said they would. I pulled out my GPS unit, but the screen showed nothing but snow. My compass needle was spinning lazily in circles. Even my radio was picking up nothing but static. Equipment failure, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The fog is interfering with the electronics. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. Fog doesn't make compass needles spin. Fog doesn't make trails disappear and reappear. We started walking in what we thought was the direction of the main trail, but after 10 minutes we found ourselves back in the same clearing. The rhododendron with the spiral flowers was right where we'd left it, except now the spiral was turning the other direction. That's not possible, Dr. Morrison said. Flowers don't rearrange themselves. William knelt down and touched the ground around the bush. Look at the earth, he said. No footprints, no tool marks, but the soil has been disturbed. He was right. The dirt around the base of the plant was churned up, like something had been digging, but there were no signs of human activity, no evidence that anyone had been here to move the flowers. Dr. Morrison's chemical sensor was still beeping rapidly. The pheromone levels are incredible, she said. It's like the entire garden is having a conversation we can't understand. That's when we heard the screaming. It came from deeper in the garden, high-pitched and terrified. Definitely human, definitely in trouble. Dr. Chen, Dr. Morrison said, and started running toward the sound. I followed, with William close behind. We crashed through rhododendron bushes that seemed to grab at our clothes, following the screams deeper into the garden. We found Dr. Chen in a small clearing, surrounded by rhododendrons that were moving. Not slowly, like the one Dr. Morrison had observed that morning. These were moving fast, their branches reaching toward him like arms. They won't let me leave, he shouted. Every time I try to go, they block the path. I could see what he meant. The bushes had formed a complete circle around him, their branches intertwined so tightly that there was no way through. And as we watched, the circle was getting smaller. I pulled out my radio. Martha, we need emergency evacuation at Craggy Dome Gardens. We have a person trapped and in immediate danger. Static. Nothing but static. The plants, William said quietly. They're protecting themselves, just like grandmother said. Protecting themselves from what? I demanded. He looked at me with sad, knowing eyes. From people who take too much. That's when I noticed Dr. Chen's backpack. It was full of plant samples, roots, stems, flowers. Enough botanical specimens to stock a laboratory. The rhododendrons pressed closer, and Dr. Chen screamed again. But this time, I could have sworn I heard the plants screaming back. We have to do something, Doctor, Morrison said, but her voice was shaking. I looked around the circle of rhododendrons. They were definitely moving now, no denying it, no explaining it away with fog or equipment failure. The branches swayed toward Dr. Chen like they were alive, like they were hunting. Stay back, I told Dr. Morrison and William, then pulled out my bush knife. I'm going to cut through. The moment the blade touched the first branch, every rhododendron in the garden started shaking. The sound was incredible, thousands of leaves rustling at once, like a massive windstorm. Except there was no wind. The branch I'd cut started bleeding. Not sap, actual red blood that dripped onto my boots. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the knife. Plants don't bleed. Plants definitely don't bleed human blood. Don't hurt them, William said urgently. They're scared. Scared? I stared at him. They're plants. Look around, Sam. Really look. I forced myself to study the garden with my ranger's eye. What I saw made my knees weak. Every single rhododendron was positioned in a defensive pattern. The larger ones formed an outer barrier, while smaller ones created secondary walls. It was like looking at a fort, designed by someone who understood military strategy. And in the center, trapped in that shrinking circle, Dr. Chen was sobbing. How many samples did you take? William called to him. Just a few, Chen answered. Some rare specimens for the university. Standard research. Collection. How many? William's voice was harder now. 50, maybe 60 plants. But they were just small samples. The rhododendrons shuddered, and the circle tightened another foot. Dr. Chen pressed himself flat against the ground. You took 50 plants? Dr. Morrison stared at her colleague in horror. That's not research, that's strip mining. I was starting to understand. The plants are protecting themselves. They think we're all here to harvest them. William nodded grimly. The mountain remembers every plant that was taken, every flower, every root, every stem. And now it's fighting back. Dr. Morrison's chemical sensor was going crazy, beeping so fast it sounded like a fire alarm. The pheromone levels are beyond anything I've ever recorded. It's like every plant in a 100-mile radius is connected to this conversation. That's when I noticed the trees. The ancient oaks and maples that towered over the rhododendron garden were leaning inward, their branches reaching down toward us. Not slowly, like normal tree growth. Fast enough that I could see them moving. We need to get out of here, I said. All of us, right now. But when I looked for the trail we'd used to enter the garden, it was gone again. In its place stood a wall of rhododendrons so thick it looked like it had been growing there for decades. The paths keep changing, Doctor, Morrison whispered. They're hurting us. I pulled out my GPS again, but the screen was still blank. My radio produced nothing but static, and my compass needle spun uselessly. Whatever was happening here, it was interfering with every piece of technology I carried. William, I said, your grandmother's stories. How did people get out? He was quiet for a long moment, studying the moving plants around us. They had to ask permission, and they had to give something back. Give what back? What they took. All eyes turned to Dr. Chen, still trapped in his life. Shrinking circle of angry rhododendrons. His backpack full of stolen plants. I can't give them back, he said desperately. I've already processed most of them. They're in sample containers, preserved in chemicals. The rhododendrons shuddered again, and several of them started producing a high-pitched sound. Not quite a whistle, not quite a scream. Other plants throughout the garden answered, creating a chorus that made my teeth ache. They know, William said. They know their children are dead. That's when the ground started moving. At first I thought it was my imagination, but then I saw Dr. Morrison struggling to keep her balance. The earth beneath our feet was shifting, rising and falling like gentle waves. Root systems. Dr. Morrison breathed. They're moving underneath us. I could feel it now, massive roots shifting below the soil, creating ripples across the entire garden. It was like standing on the back of some enormous sleeping creature that was starting to wake up. Dr. Chen screamed again as his circle of rhododendrons closed to just a few feet around him. But now other plants were joining the attack. Vines dropped from the overhanging trees, and smaller shrubs pushed up through the soil around his feet. We have to help him, Dr. Morrison said, starting forward. No, William grabbed her arm. If you interfere now, they'll think you're all working together. So, what do we do? Just watch him die? Before William could answer, something incredible happened. Dr. Chen's backpack split open, spilling plant samples across the ground. But instead of just lying there, the samples began moving on their own, crawling across the soil toward the living rhododendrons. Impossible, Dr. Morrison whispered. The dead plant samples reached the base of the nearest rhododendron bush and seemed to melt into the soil. Within seconds, new shoots were sprouting from the ground. Not just any shoots, but exact replicas of the dendron bush, plants that had been harvested. They're bringing them back to life, I said, unable to believe my own words. The circle of rhododendrons stopped closing in on Dr. Chen. The bleeding branch I'd cut sealed itself and began growing new leaves. Throughout the garden, the angry chorus of plant voices faded to a low murmur. But we weren't safe yet. More people are coming, William said suddenly. I can hear vehicles on the access road. He was right. Through the fog and distance, I could hear the sound of trucks climbing the mountain. Big trucks, with heavy equipment. Commercial collectors, Dr. Morrison said, her face pale. I saw their permit applications at the university. They're planning to harvest rhododendrons for landscaping companies. The plants heard the trucks too. The murmur turned back into angry rustling, and the ground beneath our feet started shaking more violently. "They're going to fight," William said. "The whole mountain is going to fight." I tried my radio one more time, desperate to call for help, to warn whoever was coming up the mountain. But instead of static, I heard something that froze my blood. Voices. Coming through the radio, but not human voices. They sounded like wind through leaves, like water over stones, like the deep groan of tree trunks bending in a storm. And somehow, impossibly, I understood what they were saying. Protect, protect. No more taking, no more death. I looked at William, who had gone completely pale. "You hear them too?" He nodded. "The whole mountain is awake now, and it's angry." The truck sounds were getting closer, and the plant voices were getting louder. "Doctor," Morrison's chemical sensor was beeping so fast it sounded like it might explode. "How many people are in those trucks?" I asked. 20, maybe 30, she replied, "plus heavy machinery for digging up mature plants." The rhododendrons around us started shaking violently, and I could see movement throughout the entire forest. Every plant, from the smallest wildflower to the largest oak tree, was preparing for war. "They don't understand," William said quietly. "The collectors don't know what they're walking into." I made a decision that probably saved all our lives. "Run," I told Dr. Morrison and William. "Find those trucks and warn them. Get everyone off the mountain." "What about you?" Dr. Morrison asked. I looked around at the awakening forest, at the plants that were no longer hiding their intelligence. "Someone has to stay and try to talk to them." "Sam," William said, "you don't speak their language." "Then teach me." William looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "You can't just learn to speak with plants in 5 minutes." "Your grandmother did it," I said. "Her grandmother before her. It's possible." The sound of trucks was getting louder, and the entire garden was now moving like a living thing. Rhododendrons swayed in coordination, their branches reaching toward the sky like arms preparing for battle. "It takes years of learning," William protested. "Years of understanding the old ways." "We don't have years, we have minutes." Doctor Morrison was gathering her equipment, stuffing sensors and cameras into her backpack. "I'm not leaving you here alone." "Yes, you are." I grabbed her shoulders and looked her in the eyes. "Those people in the trucks have no idea what they're walking into. If this mountain decides to protect itself against 30 people with heavy machinery, people are going to die." She stared at me for a moment, then nodded. "Be careful, Sam." She and William ran toward the sound of the approaching vehicles, leaving me alone in a garden full of plants that were no longer pretending to be just plants. I sat down in the center of the clearing, cross-legged on the churned earth. It felt ridiculous, but I closed my eyes and tried to remember everything my Cherokee grandmother had told me about the mountain spirits. "The plants have been here longer than people," she'd said. "They remember everything, the good and the bad. They remember which humans can be trusted." I opened my eyes and looked at the rhododendron bush that had started this whole thing, the one with the spiral of flowers that kept changing direction. "I'm Samuel Ridgway," I said out loud, feeling foolish. "My Cherokee name is Atsila Nefi, Fire Rock. My grandmother was Mary Walking Stick. She taught me to respect the mountain, but I forgot." The bush stopped swaying. Every plant in the clearing went absolutely still. I kept talking, not sure if I was communicating or just talking to myself. "I've protected these mountains for 19 years. Not perfectly, but I've tried. I've kept people from taking too much, from damaging the rare plants." The radio at my belt crackled to life again, but this time the voices were clearer. "Fire Rock. Mary's grandson. We remember." The hands were shaking. The plants were actually talking to me. "The people coming up the mountain," I said. "They want to take rhododendrons, lots of them, but they don't understand what you are." The response came from everywhere at once, from the rustling leaves, from the vibrations in the ground, from the chemical signals Dr. Morrison's sensor was still detecting. "We know. We feel the machines. Heavy death coming. Let me warn them," I pleaded. "Let me get them to leave peacefully." The silence stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Then the plants began moving again, but differently this time. Instead of the aggressive swaying, they were creating an opening, A clear path that led toward the truck sounds. Hurry, fire rock. Anger grows. Mountain wakes. I ran down the path the plants had opened for me, following the sound of diesel engines and shouting voices. Behind me, I could feel the garden closing again, the rhododendrons returning to their defensive positions. I found the trucks parked at the main trailhead, Wajamsar, 3 large flatbeds loaded with tree spades and earth movers. About 20 men in work clothes were unloading equipment, while a man in a business suit gestured toward the mountain. Doctor. Morrison and William were arguing with the man in the suit, but he wasn't listening. I don't care about your plant behavior studies, he was saying. We have a permit to harvest decorative shrubs, and that's exactly what we're going to do. You don't understand, Doctor, Morrison said desperately. The plants are exhibiting defensive behavior. This could be dangerous. The man laughed. Dangerous plants? What are they going to do, bloom at us? I ran up to them, out of breath from the sprint down the mountain. You have to stop, I gasped. You can't take plants from this area. And who are you? The suit demanded. I'm the park ranger for this section. There's been unusual, seismic activity. The area isn't safe for heavy equipment. It wasn't entirely a lie. The ground had been moving. I don't see any seismic warning on my permit, he said, waving a clipboard. These rhododendrons are worth thousands of dollars to landscaping companies. We're not leaving empty-handed. That's when the mountain answered for itself. A sound like thunder rolled down from the peaks, but the sky was clear. The ground under our feet began to shake. Not violent earthquake shaking, but rhythmic, purposeful tremors. What the hell was that? One of the workers asked. Before anyone could answer, the fog began to lift. Not naturally, not gradually, but all at once, like a curtain being pulled away. And we could see the rhododendron garden. Every single plant was moving. Thousands of rhododendron bushes swaying in perfect synchronization, their branches reaching toward the sky. The entire mountainside looked like a green ocean with pink waves. That's impossible, the suit whispered. The workers were backing toward their trucks, eyes wide with fear. But their boss stood his ground, greed overcoming common sense. It's just wind patterns, he said, though his voice was shaking. Unusual air currents in the mountains. Load the equipment. Sir, one of the workers said, maybe we should come back another day. Load the equipment. That's when the trees started falling. Not randomly, not due to wind or disease. The ancient oaks that lined the trail began toppling in a coordinated pattern, each one falling to block the road at precise intervals. Within minutes, the trucks were trapped, massive tree trunks blocking the route both up and down the mountain. Now, do you believe me? I shouted over the sound of crashing timber. The man in the suit was staring at the blocked road with his mouth open. This is the mountain protecting itself, William said quietly. And if you don't leave, now, it's going to get worse. As if in response to his words, the rhododendron garden erupted in a chorus of sounds, the same plant voices I'd heard through the radio, but amplified 100-fold. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. How do we leave? Dr. Morrison asked, looking at the fallen trees. The road is completely blocked. William walked over to the nearest fallen oak and placed his hand on its trunk. He spoke in Cherokee, words I didn't understand but recognized as respectful, ceremonial. The tree shuddered once, then began rolling to the side, opening a narrow gap just wide enough for vehicles to pass. Follow me, he said to the workers. Stay on the road, don't stop, and don't look back. The man in the suit grabbed William's arm. What about my permits? My contract? William looked at him with sad eyes. Some things are worth more than money. Find another mountain. One by one, the trucks squeezed through the gap William had, opened, and disappeared down the mountain. The last thing I heard was the man in the suit shouting about lawsuits and property rights. As soon as the sound of engines faded, the fallen trees rolled back into position, sealing the road again. Is it over? Dr. Morrison asked. I looked up at the rhododendron garden. The plants had stopped their coordinated swaying, but I could still feel their attention, their awareness, like being watched by thousands of intelligent eyes. It's over for now, I said, but the mountain won't forget, and it won't trust easily again. William nodded. The plants have learned that humans can be dangerous. They'll be more careful, more protective. Will they let people visit? Dr. Morrison asked. For research? For hiking? Respectful people, William said. People who ask permission. People who take only what they need and give something back. I pulled out my radio and was relieved to hear Martha's voice come through clearly. Sam? Where have you been? I've been trying to reach you for hours. Equipment trouble, I said, but it's fixed now. Closing the access road to Craggy Dome Gardens indefinitely. Unstable conditions. Copy that. You need backup? I looked around at the peaceful forest. The plants were still now, but somehow I knew they were listening, waiting to see what I would do next. No backup needed, I said. Just going to do some maintenance on the trail markers. 3 months later, I was still thinking about what had happened in the rhododendron garden. The official report listed the incident as unusual seismic activity causing road blockage and equipment malfunction. The commercial harvesting company had tried to sue the Park Service, but their case fell apart when geological surveys showed evidence of ground instability. Dr. Morrison had returned to the university with a completely new research focus. Instead of studying how plants communicate, she was studying how to communicate with them. Her papers on potential consciousness in complex plant communities were either ignored by mainstream scientists or labeled as career suicide by her colleagues. But she didn't care. She had video footage of plants moving in coordinated patterns, chemical readings that showed impossible levels of interspecies communication, and testimony from 3 reliable witnesses. The scientific community could ignore her all they wanted. She knew what she'd seen. William had become my unofficial partner on the mountain. Together, we developed new protocols for botanical research in sensitive areas. Researchers had to receive permission not just from the Park Service, but from the plants themselves, a process that involved traditional Cherokee blessing ceremonies and careful negotiation with the ecosystem. It sounded crazy to anyone who hadn't been there, but it worked. The mountains were healthier than they'd been in decades. Rare plant populations were actually increasing instead of declining. And visitors reported an unusual sense of peace in the rhododendron gardens, as if the plants themselves were welcoming, respectful guests. But not everyone was welcome. 2 more commercial harvesting operations had tried to access the gardens, and both had experienced equipment failures and unexpected obstacles. Word was getting around in certain circles that Craggy Dome was a place to avoid. The plants remembered. They remembered every attempt to exploit them, every person who had taken more than they should. But they also remembered kindness, respect, and genuine care for their welfare. I learned to listen for their voices in the wind, to read their moods in the way they arranged their flowers, to understand their warnings when storms or dangerous people approached. It wasn't magic, it was communication, as real as any human conversation. My wife Sarah noticed the change in me immediately. "You're different," she said one evening as we sat on our porch looking up at the mountains. "More like your grandmother always said you should be." She was right. I was carrying forward traditions I'd nearly forgotten, protecting the mountains in ways my ancestors would have recognized. The scientific ranger and the Cherokee traditionalist had finally learned to work together. "The plants are teaching me," I told her, "teaching me to be a better guardian." She smiled and took my hand. "Your grandmother would be proud." But the work wasn't finished. Every day brought new challenges. Developers who wanted to build resort hotels, mining companies interested in the rare minerals under the mountains, tourists who thought "leave no trace" was just a suggestion. The plants were watching them all, learning, adapting, preparing to defend themselves if necessary. And I was watching too, serving as translator between 2 very different kinds of intelligence, human ambition and plant wisdom. Some nights, when the fog rolled through the rhododendron gardens and the moonlight turned the flowers silver, I could hear them talking among themselves, sharing information about weather patterns, coordinating pollination strategies, warning each other about potential threats. But sometimes, when the conversation paused, I could swear they were talking about me. "Fire Rock is learning," they seemed to say. "Mary's grandson remembers the old agreements." And in those moments, standing alone on a mountain trail with thousands of conscious plants around me, I didn't feel like a crazy person talking to vegetation. I felt like I was finally home. The rhododendron gardens are still open to visitors, but only certain kinds of visitors, the ones who ask permission before picking a single flower. The ones who say thank you before they leave. The ones who understand that they're walking through someone else's home. The plants can tell the difference. They always could. They just hadn't been protecting themselves before. Now they are. And if you're hiking in the mountains and you notice plants behaving strangely, moving when there's no wind, arranged in patterns that seem too perfect to be natural, remember that you're not just looking at vegetation. You're looking at an ancient intelligence that has been here far longer than humans and will be here long after we're gone. Be respectful. Ask permission. And whatever you do, don't take more than you're given. The mountain is always watching, and it never forgets. My name is Robert Blackstone, but everyone calls me Bobby. I've been a ranger in the Monongahela National Forest for 16 years now, and I thought I knew every predator that walked these West Virginia mountains. Bears, wolves, coyotes, BSB. I've tracked them all. I've seen what they can do to livestock, to campers who don't follow the rules, to hunters who get careless. My daddy was a ranger before me, and his daddy before him. The Blackstone family has been watching over these hills since before the government even knew they needed watching. We know the old stories, the ones the tourists don't hear. Stories about things that hunt when the moon is dark and the fog rolls thick through the valleys. But I never believed in that nonsense. Not until October of 1987. The morning it all started, I was sitting in my truck at the end of Timber Ridge Road, drinking coffee from my thermos and watching the sunrise paint the mountains orange and red. The radio crackled to life around. 7 a.m. Bobby, you out there? It was my partner Steve Mountain Hawk. Steve's family has been in these mountains even longer than mine, if you can believe that. I'm here, Steve. What's the problem? Got another call from Old Man Peterson. Says something got into his cattle again last night. Third time this month. I sighed and started the engine. Peterson's farm sat right on the edge of the national forest, where the trees got thick and the valleys got deep. It was prime territory for predators looking for easy meals. I'll head over there. Any details? Same as before. One cow dead, but here's the thing. It's not eaten right. Peterson says it looks like whatever killed it was playing with it first. That made me pause. Predators don't play with their food. They kill, they eat, they move on. It's that simple. But I'd been hearing strange things from the farmers around here lately. Cattle found arranged in patterns. Kills that showed signs of tools being used. Things that didn't make sense if you were thinking about normal animals. I drove through the morning mist to Peterson's place, my radio crackling with the usual Forest Service chatter. Weather report said fog would be heavy in the valleys for most of the week. October in these mountains could get real lonely real fast when you couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction. Peterson met me at his gate, his face grim and his hands shaking slightly as he held his coffee cup. He was a tough old man who'd been raising cattle for 40 years, but something had him spooked. "It's not right, Bobby," he said as we walked toward his pasture. "Whatever's doing this, it ain't natural." The cow was lying about 50 yards from the fence line, closer to the forest than the others in the herd. What I saw there made my stomach turn. The animal had been killed clean, one bite to the throat, precise as a surgeon. But that's not what bothered me. It was the way the other cattle were arranged around it. They were standing in a perfect circle, all facing inward toward the dead cow. All of them alive, all of them calm, like they were waiting for something. When Peterson called to them, they didn't move. When he threw feed, they didn't even look at him. "How long they been standing like that?" I asked. "Found them this way at dawn. Been 4 hours now, and they haven't moved an inch." I walked the perimeter, looking for tracks. Found plenty, cow prints, Peterson's boots, and something else, wolf tracks, but bigger than any wolf I'd seen in these mountains. The pad was nearly 6 inches across, with claw marks that dug deep into the soft earth. But here's what made my skin crawl. Every few feet, the wolf tracks would stop, and there would be a single human footprint, barefoot, normal size, like someone had been walking alongside the wolf. Then the human prints would stop, and the wolf tracks would continue. "Peterson," I called. "You have any visitors last night? Anyone walking around your property?" "Nobody comes out here after dark, Bobby. You know that." I followed the tracks toward the tree line, my hand resting on the radio clipped to my belt. The trail led straight into the thick forest, where the morning fog hung like curtains between the trees. As I reached the edge of the woods, I heard something that made me freeze. Howling. But not like any wolf howl I'd ever heard. It started low and mournful, like normal wolves do when they're calling to their pack. But then it changed. It got higher, more complex. And for just a moment, just a split second, it sounded like someone crying, like someone calling for help. I stood there listening until the sound faded away into the fog. Then I walked back to my truck and radioed Steve. "I need you to come out to Peterson's place," I told him, "and bring the plaster kit. I've got some tracks here that don't make sense." "What kind of tracks?" I looked. Back at the tree line, where the fog was getting thicker by the minute. Somewhere in there, something was waiting. Something that killed cattle for sport and arranged the survivors like pieces on a chessboard. "The kind that shouldn't exist," I said. Steve arrived an hour later with Dr. Carol Jefferson, our wildlife biologist. Carol had a PhD from some fancy university and could tell you everything about animal behavior from the way they left their droppings. If anyone could make sense of what I'd found, it would be her. We made plaster casts of the tracks while Peterson watched from his porch, still shaking his head and muttering about things not being right. The cattle hadn't moved. They were still standing in that perfect circle, like they were guarding the dead cow or waiting for it to get back up. "These are definitely wolf tracks," Carol said, kneeling next to the casts. "But the size is unusual. I'd say this animal weighs at least 150 pounds, maybe more." "What about the human prints?" I asked. She looked uncomfortable. "I can't explain those. They appear to be from the same individual throughout the trail, but the spacing suggests they were made at different times. Maybe someone walked this path earlier, and the wolf followed the scent trail?" It was a reasonable explanation, but it didn't feel right. The tracks were too evenly spaced, too deliberate. And there was something else, something I hadn't mentioned to them yet. "Come with me," I said, leading them back to the tree line. "I want to show you something else." About 10 feet into the forest, I found what I'd spotted earlier but hadn't wanted to examine alone. Hanging from a low branch was a piece of fabric, flannel shirt, looked like torn and bloody, but it was tied to the branch in a careful knot, like someone had put it there on purpose. "Could be from a hunter," Steve suggested. "Maybe someone got caught in the brush." I untied the fabric and held it up. The tear was clean, not jagged like you'd get from thorns or branches. It looked like it had been cut with something sharp, and the blood wasn't dry, it was still tacky to the touch. "How long do you think this has been here?" I asked Carol. She examined it carefully. Based on the blood oxidation, I'd say less than 12 hours, probably closer to 6. That put it right around the time Peterson said he heard the disturbance in his pasture. I bagged the evidence and was about to head back to the truck when we heard it again, that strange howling that sounded almost human. But this time, it was closer. Carol went pale. "That's not normal wolf vocalization," she whispered. "Wolves don't have the vocal structure to make those sounds." The howl came again, and this time I could swear I heard words in it, faint and distorted, but definitely human speech mixed in with the animal sounds. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. "We need to go," Steve said, his hand moving to the pistol on his hip. Steve had been in Vietnam, and he didn't scare easy. If he was nervous, I was paying attention. As we walked back toward the truck, something moved in the fog behind us. Not the sound of footsteps. Something heavier, like a large animal trying to move quietly. I turned around, but the mist was too thick to see anything clearly. "Just keep walking," I told the others, but I unsnapped the holster on my own weapon. The drive back to the ranger station was quiet. Carol was busy making notes, and Steve was staring out the window at the forest like he expected something to jump out at us. I was trying to process what we'd seen and heard, but none of it fit with anything I knew about wildlife behavior. Back at the station, I called the other rangers in our district to see if anyone else had reported unusual predator activity. What I learned made my blood run cold. 3 other farms had reported similar incidents in the past month. Livestock killed in the same precise manner, other animals behaving strangely, and tracks that didn't make sense. But here's the thing, all the incidents were happening in a rough circle around a specific area of the forest. An area we called Devil's Hollow. Devil's Hollow was about 20 miles of the roughest, most remote terrain in the national forest. No maintained trails, no camping facilities, just thick forest and deep ravines that most people didn't even know existed. The old-timers in town had stories about that place. Stories about people who went in and didn't come out. About sounds in the night that weren't made by any natural animal. I'd always figured those were just stories meant to keep kids from wandering off into dangerous territory. But now I wasn't so sure. That afternoon, I drove out to talk to Jake Timberman, whose family had been hunting these mountains for 5 generations. If anyone knew the real stories about Devil's Hollow, it would be Jake. I found him at his cabin, cleaning a rifle and looking troubled. "Bobby," he said when he saw me, "I was just thinking about calling you. We got problems in the woods." "What kind of problems?" He set down his rifle and looked at me seriously. "The kind my grandfather used to tell stories about. The kind we hoped were just stories." Jake invited me inside and poured us both coffee. His cabin was filled with hunting trophies and old photographs of family hunting trips going back decades. But today, all that history felt heavy and ominous. "Tell me about Devil's Hollow," I said. Jake was quiet for a long moment. "My great-grandfather used to say there were things in those woods that used to be men. Said they hunted like men, but killed like wolves. Most folks figured he was just trying to scare people away from his favorite hunting spots. But you don't think so anymore. Last week, my boy Tommy was hunting up near the ridge above Devil's Hollow. He came back white as a sheet, said he saw a pack of wolves walking on their hind legs like people. Said they were carrying sticks and rocks, using them like tools." I felt my mouth go dry. "Did you believe him?" "Tommy's been hunting since he was 8 years old. He knows the difference between wolves and people. And he knows the difference between what's natural and what ain't." As the sun set behind the mountains, Jake walked me back to my truck. The fog was starting to roll in again, and the forest felt different. Expectant, like it was holding its breath. "Bobby," Jake said as I got in the truck, "if I were you, I wouldn't go into those woods alone. And I sure as hell wouldn't go there at night." I drove home through the gathering darkness, my radio silent except for the occasional weather update. The fog was getting thicker, and my headlights barely penetrated 20 feet ahead. Twice, I thought I saw shapes moving in the mist. Large forms that seemed to be keeping pace with my truck just inside the tree line. But when I stopped to look, there was nothing there. Just the fog. And the feeling that something was watching me from the darkness between the trees. The next morning, Steve's truck wasn't in the parking lot at the ranger station. That wasn't like him. Steve was always the first one in, usually by 6 a.m. with a fresh pot of coffee already brewing. By 8 o'clock, I was worried enough to drive out to his place. Steve lived alone in a small cabin about 5 miles from town, right at the edge of the forest. His truck was in the driveway, but when I knocked on his door, nobody answered. The spare key was under the flower pot where it always was, so I let myself in. The cabin was empty, but something was wrong. Steve's coffee cup was still on the kitchen table, half full and cold. His uniform was laid out on the bed like he'd been getting ready for work. But his hiking boots were gone, and so was his emergency pack. I found a note on the kitchen counter, written in Steve's handwriting. "Gone to check the cameras near Devil's Hollow. Back by morning." The trail cameras. We'd set them up 3 days ago around the perimeter of Devil's Hollow, hoping to catch whatever was killing the livestock. Steve must have gone to check them during the night. I radioed the station and told them I was going after my partner. Then I loaded my truck with emergency gear and headed for the forest. The trail cameras were about a 4-mile hike from the nearest access road. I followed Steve's footprints easily enough. He'd taken the old logging trail that cut through the heart of the woods, but about halfway to the cameras, his tracks were joined by others. Wolf tracks. At least 6 different animals, all larger than normal. They were following Steve's trail, sometimes walking right on top of his boot prints like they were deliberately tracking him. The first camera was empty, its memory card missing. The second camera had been destroyed, not by weather or accident, but deliberately smashed with something heavy. Pieces of plastic and metal were scattered around the base of the tree, like someone had beaten it with a rock. The third camera was intact, but when I checked the memory card, what I found made my hands shake. 47 pictures, all taken between midnight and 3 a.m. The first dozen showed normal forest scenes, a raccoon, a deer, an owl. But then the wolves appeared. They were huge, bigger than any wolves I'd ever seen. But that's not what made my blood run cold. It was the way they moved. In the early pictures, they were on all fours like normal wolves. But as the sequence progressed, they started standing upright, walking on their hind legs like people. And in the last picture, I could see Steve. He was standing in a small clearing, surrounded by the pack. They were all upright now, forming a circle around him like the cattle had formed a circle around the dead cow. Steve wasn't running or fighting. He was just standing there, perfectly still, like he was waiting for something, like he was part of some kind of ceremony. I stuffed the camera in my pack and followed Steve's trail deeper into the forest. The wolf tracks were everywhere now, crisscrossing through the woods in patterns that seemed almost organized, like they were patrolling a territory. About a mile past the cameras, I found Steve's radio. It was sitting on a fallen log, undamaged but turned off. Next to it was another piece of torn fabric, this time from Steve's uniform shirt. Like the fabric at Peterson's farm, it had been tied to a branch in a careful knot. The trail led deeper into Devil's Hollow, toward the heart of that twisted, dark country where even experienced hunters got lost. I should have called for backup. I should have waited for daylight, but Steve was my partner, and if he was in trouble, I wasn't going to abandon him. The sun was starting to set as I followed the trail down into a deep ravine. The fog was rolling in thick, and the temperature was dropping fast. My flashlight beam seemed weak and useless in the growing darkness. That's when I heard them. Howling, but not like any animal sound in nature. It started with one voice, then others joined in, creating a complex harmony that rose and fell like a song. But mixed in with the howling were other sounds, sounds that made my skin crawl. Human voices. Speaking words I couldn't quite understand, but definitely human speech. I followed the sounds deeper into the ravine until I came to a small clearing. What I saw there almost made me turn and run. There were at least a dozen of them, standing in a circle around a small fire. From a distance, they looked like people, standing upright, using their hands to tend the fire, communicating with each other in low voices. But as I got closer, I could see the truth. They were wolves. But wolves that walked like men. Wolves that used fire and tools. Wolves that spoke to each other in what sounded like a mixture of human language and animal sounds. And in the center of the circle, sitting cross-legged by the fire like he belonged there, was Steve. He wasn't tied up. He wasn't struggling. He was just sitting there, staring into the flames, while the creatures moved around him in what looked like some kind of ritual. One of them, the largest one, with dark fur and scars across its muzzle, was speaking to Steve in a low voice. I couldn't hear the words, but Steve was nodding like he understood. I reached for my radio, then remembered it wouldn't work this deep in the hollow. I was on my own, watching something that shouldn't exist perform some kind of ceremony on my partner. The largest creature, I was starting to think of it as the pack leader, reached into the fire and pulled out a burning stick. It held the flame close to Steve's face, and in that moment I saw something that made my blood freeze. Steve's eyes reflected the firelight like an animal's, not human eyes anymore, but the golden eyes of a wolf. The leader touched the burning stick to Steve's forehead, and Steve threw back his head and howled. But it wasn't a human scream of pain, it was a wolf's howl, deep and mournful and wild. The other creatures joined in, their voices rising in that impossible harmony I'd heard before. And as they howled, I saw Steve begin to change. His fingers grew longer, darker. His face stretched forward. His teeth became sharp and white. Hair sprouted across his skin, and his back arched as his spine reshaped itself. I was watching my partner become one of them. I must have made some sound, because suddenly all their eyes turned toward my hiding place. A dozen pairs of golden eyes, all reflecting the firelight, all looking directly at me. The pack leader spoke in a voice that was half human, half growl. "We know you're there, Bobby. Blackstone. We've been waiting for you." It knew my name. I ran. I crashed through the forest in blind panic, branches tearing at my clothes and face. Behind me, I could hear them coming. Not the sound of human footsteps, but the swift, silent movement of predators who knew these woods better than I ever would. They could have caught me. I know that now. But they let me go. They wanted me to escape, to carry the knowledge of what I'd seen back to the world. They wanted me to know that they were coming. I made it back to my truck as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, leaving the forest in complete darkness. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I drove away, I saw them in my rearview mirror, standing at the edge of the forest, watching me go. Some were still in wolf form, but others had taken human shape again. And one of them, standing slightly apart from the rest, looked exactly like Steve. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my cabin with every light on and my rifle across my knees, jumping at every sound outside. When morning came, I drove straight to Carol Jefferson's office at the university and told her everything I'd seen. She listened without interrupting, taking notes and asking careful questions. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Bobby," she said finally, "what you're describing is impossible from a biological standpoint. Lycanthropy is a myth. Wolves can't transform into humans." "Then explain the pictures," I said, pulling out the camera memory card. "Explain what happened to Steve." We loaded the pictures onto her computer and went through them one by one. Carol's face grew pale as the sequence progressed, showing the wolves standing upright, showing Steve in the circle. "This could be doctored," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Digital manipulation, special effects. Carol, you've known me for 6 years. Do I look like someone who knows how to fake photographs?" She stared at the last picture, the one showing Steve surrounded by the pack. "There has to be a rational explanation. Maybe what you saw was some kind of cult, people wearing wolf costumes, performing rituals. Costumes don't change the shape of a man's spine," I said. "Costumes don't give people claws and fangs." That afternoon, I drove back to Jake Timberman's cabin. I found him loading a truck with camping gear and hunting rifles. "Going somewhere, Jake?" He looked at me seriously. "My boy Tommy didn't come home last night. He went hunting up near Devil's Hollow yesterday evening. When he didn't show up for dinner, I went looking. He found his truck at the trailhead, but no sign of him." My stomach dropped. "Jake, I need to tell you something about Devil's Hollow, about what's really up there." I told him what I'd seen, about Steve and the pack and the impossible transformation. Jake listened without skepticism, nodding like he'd been expecting this news. "My grandfather used to say there were 2 kinds of wolves in these mountains," he said when I finished. "The ones that were born wolves and the ones that chose to become wolves." What did he mean? He said long ago, when the first settlers came to these mountains, some of them made a deal with something dark in the deep woods. They traded their humanity for the power to survive in the wilderness. But the deal came with a curse. They could only be truly human during the day and only truly wolf at night. But what I saw wasn't bound by day and night. They were changing at will. Jake's face grew grim. "Then they've grown stronger. The curse has evolved." That night, Jake and I went into Devil's Hollow together. We brought silver bullets. Jake insisted on them, said his grandfather had always carried silver when hunting the other wolves. I thought it was superstition, but I loaded my rifle anyway. We followed the same trail I'd taken the day before, but this time we moved carefully, using military tactics Steve had taught me from his time in Vietnam. As we got deeper into the hollow, we started finding signs of habitation, caves that had been modified with human tools, fire pits surrounded by stones arranged in careful patterns, and everywhere, the mixed tracks of humans and wolves, often overlapping like the same individual had made both sets. We found Tommy Timberman in a cave about 2 miles from where I'd seen Steve. He was alive, but changed. When we called his name, he looked at us with golden eyes and growled like an animal. "Tommy," Jake whispered, "it's me, son. It's your dad." Tommy tilted his head like he was trying to remember something. For a moment, his eyes cleared and looked almost human again. "Dad?" he said, his voice rough and strange. I can't remember how to be." That's when they came for us. The pack emerged from the shadows like they'd been waiting, all along. At least 20 of them, some in wolf form, others standing upright like men but covered in fur and armed with claws. At their head was the pack leader I'd seen before, and beside him, walking on 2 legs but no longer entirely human, was Steve. "Hello, Bobby," Steve said, his voice a mixture of human speech and animal growls. "We've been waiting for you to come back." "Steve, what have they done to you?" He smiled, showing fangs. "They've set me free. No more pretending to be something I'm not. No more following human rules that make no sense. The pack leader stepped forward. "I am Marcus," he said in that impossible voice. "I was the first to choose the wolf path 40 years ago. I was lost in these woods, dying of cold and hunger, when the old power offered me a choice. I chose to live." "You chose to become a monster," I said. "I chose to become what I truly was inside," Marcus replied. "As did Steve. As did young Tommy. As you will when the time comes. I'm not becoming anything like you." Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Look around you, Bobby. You're surrounded, miles from help, in our territory. You have two choices: join us willingly or join us by force." That's when Jake opened fire. His first shot took down one of the pack members. A silver bullet to the chest that dropped the creature instantly. The pack scattered, some diving for cover while others charged directly at us. I fired my rifle, watching silver bullets punch through supernatural flesh. But for every one we dropped, two more seemed to take its place. They moved too fast, struck too hard, and healed too quickly from wounds that should have been fatal. Jake went down under 3 of them, his screams cut short by the sound of tearing flesh. I kept firing until my rifle was empty, then drew my pistol and kept shooting. "Enough!" Marcus roared, his voice echoing through the hollow. The pack stopped their attack and pulled back, leaving me standing alone in the clearing with my empty gun. "You've cost us blood, Bobby Blackstone," Marcus said, his golden eyes glowing in the darkness. "But you've also proven something important. You fight like a wolf. You protect your pack like a wolf. You already have the spirit. We just need to give you the body to match." Steve stepped forward. "Bobby, don't fight this. I know what you're thinking, that this is evil, that we're monsters. But I've never felt more alive, more free. The wolf doesn't lie to itself about what it wants. It doesn't follow rules that make it weak. The wolf kills innocent people," I said. "The wolf kills to survive," Marcus corrected. "Just like you've been doing your whole life, only you've been too afraid to admit it." I looked around the clearing at the creatures surrounding me. Some were clearly new recruits. I could see the confusion in their eyes, the struggle between human thought and animal instinct. Others, like Marcus, had been wolves for so long they barely remembered their human lives. But they all had one thing in common. They all looked hungry. "Last chance, Bobby," Marcus said. "Join us or feed us." That's when I remembered the flare gun on my belt. I pulled it and fired straight up into the night sky. The flare exploded overhead, bathing the entire hollow in red light. For a moment, everyone was blinded. In that moment, I ran. But this time, I wasn't running away from them. I was running toward the old cabin I'd spotted earlier, the one with the propane tank behind it. The cabin was abandoned, probably left over from the logging days. But the propane tank behind it was full, and the gas line was still connected. I kicked in the door and started turning valves, filling the small building with explosive gas. Behind me, I could hear the pack coming. Their howls echoed through the hollow as they tracked my scent toward the cabin. I had maybe 2 minutes before they arrived. I found what I was looking for in an old toolbox, my emergency flare, the kind loggers used to carry for emergencies. I lit it and backed toward the door, watching the red flame dance in my hand. The pack burst into the clearing just as I stepped outside. Marcus was at their head, his face twisted with rage. "Clever, Bobby," he said, "but you can't kill us all. And when we're done with you, we'll visit your town. We'll visit your friends. We'll make sure this forest belongs to us completely." "Maybe," I said, holding up the flare, "but you won't be around to see it." I threw the flare through the cabin door and dove behind the propane tank. The explosion lit up the entire hollow like daylight. The blast wave knocked me unconscious, and when I woke up, half the pack was dead or dying. The others had scattered back into the deep woods. But Marcus was still alive. Burned and wounded, but alive. He crawled toward me across the smoking ground, his claws leaving furrows in the dirt. "You think you've won?" he gasped. "There are others like us. Other packs, other mountains. We're spreading, Bobby. Every month, we grow stronger." I pulled out my pistol and checked the cylinder. 1 silver bullet left. "Then I guess I better get hunting," I said, and put the bullet through his heart. The remaining pack members fled into the darkness, carrying their wounded with them. I never saw Steve again, though sometimes on quiet nights I hear howling in the deep woods that sounds almost like a man crying. I found Tommy Timberman in the ruins of the cabin, burned but human again. The shock of the explosion and Marcus's death seemed to break whatever hold the pack had on him. He couldn't remember much about his time with the wolves, which was probably a mercy. I never filed an official report about what happened in Devil's Hollow. How do you explain werewolves to the Forest Service? Instead, I marked the area as dangerous due to unstable terrain and old mining hazards. It's been off limits to the public ever since, but I know they're still out there. Not Marcus's pack. I broke that one. But there are others. In other forests. Other mountains. Sometimes I get calls from rangers in different states, describing livestock kills that don't make sense, tracks that change from human to animal, sounds in the night that can't be explained. When I get those calls, I pack my gear and my silver bullets, and I go hunting, because I learned something in Devil's Hollow that changed me forever. There are things in this world that hunt with human intelligence and animal savagery. Things that can take your friends, your family, your whole life, and twist them into something dark and hungry. And somebody has to stand between them and the people who don't know they exist. My name is Bobby Blackstone. I'm a ranger in the Monongahela National Forest. I protect these mountains from predators that most people think are just stories. But if you're ever hunting in deep wilderness and you hear wolves talking to each other in the dark, don't investigate. Don't try to get closer for a better look. Just run. And whatever you do, don't let them follow you home.